into the Wild Blue Yonder, at the edge of the universe, the midpoint of the Russell T Davies, David Tennant 60th anniversary specials. A spooky, psychological, low on cast size, high on tension adventure in the vein of episodes like Midnight, Smile. What others come to mind?
The Edge of Destruction?
Yeah.
Sleep No More, I think.
That's quite interesting. Yeah, so tons to discuss here then. The episode itself, the bounty of extras released alongside it, the novelisation, the expectations for the episode, lots to dig into. So let's get into it. Talking today are myself, Neo from Australia, along with Ingiga and Tyler, both from England. Let's just get it out of the way. It's an anniversary set of episodes. How did you deal with disappointment when it came to this one?
Well, I went to the basement and I just imagined William Hartnell in my basement to make up for the fact he wasn't in this basement. I think it more or less did the trick.
So you weren't disappointed?
I felt actually that there was more of a link with Doctor Who's history than this maybe gets credit for, because I think the style of this episode, being one where the characters are just talking about ideas mainly, and just dealing with slightly bleak existential concept, very small cast, not much in the way of... well, there was lots of stuff happening, but I think the concept of it was a kind of a high concept thing with a small cast, and it just reminded me a lot of kind of some of the classic stories you get, like early Hartnell as well. I mean, okay, I'm kind of stealing this comparison because it's not original to me, but I think there are a lot of vibes of really, really classic, like classic of classic Who in this story. There's DNA it shares there. So I think it's a nice way of celebrating the fact that this is the same show that gave us Planet of Giants, Edge of Destruction, like Sensorites, that kind of thing. Like the vibes are there.
Tyler, were you disappointed?
I think that it plays to individual strengths of Doctor Who, and it's also, it's cameo ridden in that it's David Tennant and Catherine Tate in of itself, isn't it? It's a celebration of Doctor Who in a sense, regardless. So I don't really see a necessity of any kind. I mean, I don't see a necessity ever really to retread old ground, but I do understand the idea that it's an anniversary special and there's an anniversary formula. But I think we're already doing that. We did that last week, and I think it's a perfectly reasonable thing to expect that the second episode should be a real story, if you like.
Yeah.
And maybe I'll expand on that later. But a real, true, genuine Doctor Who story. And in many ways, yeah, it's formulaic in the sense that it's standard. It's standard practice Doctor Who with real kind of innovation.
I guess the best way to honour Doctor Who is just to make good Doctor Who, right?
Just make it, really.
It's interesting because Russell himself talks about the expectations a bit. At some point, something kind of metastasized with this episode over over a year. I guess we've kind of known about we were getting 3 specials and everything. In that, an expectation fermented up that there was going to be cameos or there was going to be wacky things from other eras or there was going to be Peter Capaldi or Matt Smith in here. And it didn't really come from anywhere in the sense that actual leaks for the other 2 episodes, started trickling around here and there. Oh, a Celestial Toymaker. Oh, a certain classic Who character. Oh, Donna as a kid. Oh, it's the Meep and the Wrath Warriors and everything. Nothing was really trickling through for the second episode so much. And I guess it's that kind of absence, that no thing, that lack of leak, that kind of, it's an anniversary, therefore maybe this is happening, just kind of seeped into things, or it's an anniversary, therefore this must be happening. This whole idea of a Doctor Who anniversary, I don't even think I think people like to act like this is like from Classic Who, is this idea of we get everyone together and it's a big romp and we have, Matt and David. I don't even really think, like Silver Nemesis is a Classic Who anniversary. Like the 3 Doctors and the 5 Doctors aren't the 3 and 5 Doctor specials either. They're both kind of like, well, a smaller amount of Doctors are interacting. I feel like it's a idea that isn't actually that linked into the history of the show. The kind of anniversary special fans seem to think is like the what we're always meant to be getting. Maybe a Big Finish it is, and maybe in the comics it's what they do every second week. But even in the TV show, I feel like this thing people want doesn't even happen that much, and it kind of happened in 2022 anyway under Chris Chibnall. So it's like you've gotten what you want already, and do you just want it again and again? And I keep seeing people actually quite self-awarely say yes. Like you can see on Twitter and Reddit places, there's fans that are quite self-aware about this. Like, yes, I would have liked that again. I would have liked to have Matt Smith and Capaldi, and I would have even liked to have the centenary actual stuff from it again. Give me the Guardians of the Edge. Give me I want to see all the things again. And this episode, like you're both saying, it was sort of stuff we'd had before in a lot of ways, but not in such a crass way as we're just, throwing Matt Smith's chin at the screen to, I know that chin.
Without shade to those who do want that, I think the way that it's thought about by those people is that there's a scantness to the way that that's already done. There's already scarcity because you get it so rarely. So why aren't we getting it now? Why don't we get it for the anniversary? Because it's been 10 years. In 10 years, there's another one. I think that's the sort of genuine outlook. And it's essentially fair enough to expect certain things of television, but I also kind of think, is it not more desirable, more of a desired trait in a TV show that you love to kind of innovate it, even in ways like this, which I don't think it's particularly innovative in form. I think it's taking modes of Doctor Who and being creative with them. Previous modes, existing modes of Doctor Who are being creative with them, and I don't see why that's less desirable.
What's interesting to me is that Russell is sort of self-aware about this himself. In the official podcast for this episode, he talked about how at some point fan expectations started piling up over these Matt Smith dreams, Peter Capaldi dreams.
We kept this very secret. I think that might have had an unfortunate effect. I think everyone's expecting Matt Smith and Peter Capaldi and the ghost of William Hartnell riding on the back of the Garm on board this spaceship. Was actually, I kept this secret for a very simple reason. Partly because I think it's nice to keep some episodes completely secret, but also because this is actually the simplest one of the lot. If you describe this episode, so they arrive on a station and they arrive on a spaceship and they meet evil versions of themselves. That's it. That's it. There's nothing more. That's it. Do they win? Yes, they do. Of course they do. I mean, with a Star Beast, you could sort of say, oh, well, the Meep turns out to be evil, and actually that's about Donna. The other episodes are more complicated. This is so simple. That's why I kept it secret, but I wonder if that's had an unfortunate effect and made it disappointingly simple on its broadcast.
Even if you were going to spoil this, what are you going to say? The shapeshifters, and they look like the Doctor and Donna, and eventually the good guys win. Like, there's not really a spike that you can kind of spoil exactly in the story. What you see is what you get if you're just going to do like a logline pitch for it. And so his idea was, well, what if I just hide everything about this episode? And that kind of becomes what's interesting about it is we're just not saying anything about it, because there's not really, if we just advertise this episode normally, it would sound pretty thin. So by not advertising it, that will give it the allure. And the issue was because it's the 60th anniversary, people started projecting anniversary desires onto it. And RTD wonders, did he screw that up? Do you guys think he screwed that up, keeping it close to the chest in that way? Or do you think it was kind of fan-inflicted to get disappointed, those who got disappointed?
I'd say a bit of both. I think they could have played it slightly differently. Like when they did in Doctor Who magazine, or whichever magazine it was, they had a redacted cast list for the episode. So David Tennant, Catherine Tate, redacted. And it's like, well, there aren't really cast secrets in the episode at all. So that was a bit of a strange move. But in terms of just not talking about the episode, I think that's completely fair enough. I think, I think they wanted to preserve the journey of discovery that the Doctor and Donna go on in this episode and the strange things that pop up. I think it would have sucked if there were trailers for this episode showing off the giant arms or the giant, like, all of that. Those are fun things to just have unsullied, I guess. It's nice to actually go on that journey. So I think, I think fans were so busy trying to slot in their ideal iconography-filled anniversary concept that, as we've just discussed, isn't so much a real thing as just a fan imagination thing. They were trying to map this onto these specials, even though we'd already seen over and over there was no good reason to actually map them onto these specials. These specials are transparently not doing that at all. Like, they made it clear, like, they kind of made clear what these specials were, like, ages ago, well in advance. And it was just, so those fans who were still clinging on to this idea that this was going to be, I don't know, Day of the Doctor again, or, God forbid, 5 Doctors again, or fucking light at the end.
Truthfully, I don't think it matters all that much to RTD. I think he's such a salesman that the marketing approach for this episode was, I think it was put out ideally. I think it everything that we saw in the trailers, the old redacted trailers, where
I
think that's the bit where we got she mentioned Gallifrey from, and I think that kind of set the ball rolling on certain things. I think that I think this guy is a very successful, very brilliant marketer as well as all else. So I think it probably went successfully in his mind.
I feel like the show is such a having David Tennant and Catherine Tate back isn't just a success in that people are interested because, oh, we love those actors, we love those characters. It's a success because they're both incredibly good actors. And I think an episode just playing entirely on that is a really smart move. I think that's giving the audience what they want, even if they don't know it. I think that's rewarding the audience in a much greater way than just throwing around continuity would be. I think it's what people want, even if they don't know it's what they want. Basically, I think giving the two actors, different characters to play in the episode itself, it's kind of a best of both worlds. What we're getting from them, I think this is an episode people will remember really, really fondly. I think because the actors get to do so much with it, that feels like the anniversary-ish treat to me more than anything else. Is we've got these actors back, so rather than just having regularish adventures with them, let's really, 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 really specifically celebrate we have them back by giving them an episode that's so specifically actor focused. I think that's a really cool thing. I think it's a very celebratory thing.
And as ever with fans, it's the sense of these personally projected sense of feeling excluded because the actors that are back aren't the ones you wanted. So it's like, oh no, this weird fan entitlement, I think, ultimately. Because as much as I get wanting to have your favourite actors come back and cross over and do more stuff, that is that needs a very specific set of circumstances to happen. This fan anniversary idea that they've created has given them the sense that they're entitled to have it happen every 10 years, and they're just not. Like, it's just not a thing, right? So I think there's a lot of fans that kind of can't, bring themselves to actually appreciate how good this is, in terms of just what it is and what it's offering.
It's never been a thing either. Even in the Three Doctors, we already had that kind of awkward situation of where one of them's not super back, is he? And then the Five Doctors is like a farce, and they were advertising the
wax figure
Fourth Doctor back, and he's not back. It's there's never been this status quo of everyone is happy to come back and everyone succeeds in coming back. That's never happened. There's always been some actors don't want to come back, some actors can't really come back. There's never been this kind of equality of every single actor ever lives in the same house and they all love each other and they love to, Teletubby play around on the screen in front of you. That's never going to happen. And it's kind of insane to expect of, real actors, which they all are. It's when you get a couple that really like coming back together, like Troughton and Pertwee or Matt and David, that's great, but that's an exception. That's not the kind of norm you can get from everyone. That's why you love it when you can get it. You can't get it from everyone, and that's great.
Do you guys keep seeing that thing where people are saying, oh, this would have been great had it been 13 years, or would be great if it had been 9 in rows, which admittedly I'm guilty of myself. I like the idea of the fantasy of it being 12 in Clara, but I think it's the fact that we're doing this at all is a testament to how good the writing is in of itself. It's just good. It's just really solid, really, really solid writing, and it's a great script and brilliant by two brilliant actors. And I think the idea of inserting two other brilliant actors into this script is we're only getting this feeling because it's so good. There's so much to be brought from this.
Russell said something really interesting about the episode on the behind the scenes where he said there was a point where he was kind of wondering, is this all I'm doing? Should I not have William Hartnell? Should I not have some kind of epic twist in the story, whether that's, bringing in a continuity thing or just kind of going ham with, a more zany resolution about what's on the ship or anything like that. And he had to really calm himself down and say, I've made a strong concept here. That's enough. I need to just stay true to the basic concept I've made for the episode. I can't clutter this or complicate it. That's insecurity, and I can't let that take over the story. I've got a good concept. I just need to ride that concept out and not introduce or complicate it at all. I think that's so interesting, especially for him to say.
You have to take a great deep breath with this episode and trust it. Now, I remember sitting writing it thinking, should we find a cellar full of robot killers? Should we discover a vault on the spaceship that's got William Hartnell inside it? Genuinely, I thought, the 60th, I thought, should we do this? Should we do that? And I had to have words to myself. I had to sit there going, just stay true to the idea. You said to yourself, it's just the two of them on board a spaceship with their doubles. Stick to that. It's a very important thing about writing. It's amazing how writing wanders often and does this. Stick to the idea, which means trusting it, which means saying, I believe this will be a great spaceship. I believe you'll want to spend time in it. I believe you want to spend time with those two actors. I believe the flight deck will look magnificent. And it does. I mean, everyone's worked so hard.
What do you think of that impulse?
That's an enormous relief, I think, to hear that from him, because that's like it's a relief that he didn't give in to that instinct. It's not a relief to hear that he had it. But I think that is a perfect, it really is a clear case of the fanish kind of meta-fiction, stuff instinct threatening a story that is strong by itself. I think there's really no real way that the concept of this story, the clear concept and the strong imagery, the just strong basic ideas could actually be improved by infesting it with Doctor Who lore shit or Doctor Who cameo shit or Doctor Who from history bullshit, self-congratulation, if you like. So I'm just so glad he just kept that far away from this story, because I think in a wider sense, in terms of these 3 episodes as a mini season, having a story like this in there, which is doing the traditional Doctor Who thing of let's just tell a story, let's just tell a high concept story without doing the whole self-wank stuff, I think it is important to the integrity of the overall little project, even though not just thinking about this episode by itself, but thinking about this whole mini season as like a sequence. Having an episode that's just like a pure Doctor Who, if you like, I think helps the integrity of the whole thing.
Yeah, it feels real that we had an episode that isn't, oh, the thing's back, but just let's do a really good kind of solid story that you could theoretically cut out. That's what makes it feel real to me, in that this, you need the finale and you need the premiere. This you could have theoretically replaced by something else, which kind of gives it a, not a sanctity, but like this is a real episode of Doctor Who. This isn't an event episode of Doctor Who, if that makes sense. Which I get is what has really frustrated some people, but I think it gives it a kind of solid, it makes this mini-series feel solid, like a real run. Yeah, I totally agree.
From a creative perspective alone, I think if you're trying to sell 14 as his own separate incarnation of Doctor Who, then I think this is a necessity.
I think we've really outlined where we're coming to this episode from, in the sense that we weren't expecting it to be, William Hartnell and Sean Pertwee returning to play his father and Matt Smith, chinning around. We weren't expecting that, and we don't need that. I think we've established that at this point. So in terms of what we did actually get, there is kind of 2 modes the episode is in. There's like 90% of the episode is on the spaceship and it's the spooky midnight-esque story. But it starts off with a kind of riff on celebrity historicals. So we get Isaac Newton, played by an actor from It's a Sin. We get very jaunty Murray Gold music, and it's like, oh, it's the moment the apple fell on Newton's head. But there's loads of apples because the TARDIS landed in the tree. And 14 and Donna are doing their best Series 2 Rose and 10 impression there, being very happy and talkative and gurney. Up on top of the tree, and gravity, the word gets kind of mangled and it becomes mavity. What did you think of that opening?
I'm going to be honest, I didn't find it very funny. I thought it was awkwardly acted and even a little bit awkwardly directed. And it just felt very... as much as I enjoy the things it sets up for the rest of the episode, like, the whole mavity thing, I do think it's kind of one of those annoying things where there's almost this instinct to homogenize Doctor Who. Like, if we're doing a really bleak and dark episode like this, we need some stupid piece of froth at the start, otherwise people won't think it's Doctor Who. It's like, what? Like, the fun of Doctor Who is that it can be tonally varied. And yeah, okay, admittedly I sound ridiculous because I'm complaining about tonal variation within the episode here, but almost it's like this random thing just completely diverting from the tone of the overall episode just feels like a thing that's just there because some weird, like, forced hilarity impulse, and we don't really need it. I think if you just skip the intro and just go straight to after the titles the moment the TARDIS lands, it just feels like we've picked up straight from the end of the last episode, and it feels like a more coherent episode overall. I just thought the opening kind of sucked. That's my opinion.
It's quite a jarring entrance to the episode. It feels a bit sort of slapdash. I think it's a bit of a stain on an otherwise very solid episode. I don't think it's unfunny. I think that's the main problem. I think the problem is that, see, for us as viewers, we're retreading the same joke, aren't we, now? But but what this really is that this is the origin of the character says various variations of the same word joke that RTD did in Destination Starro. We're seeing it the wrong way around.
Yeah.
Oh god, it's literally
So I'm already tired of that joke.
It's literally just the mini-sode again. It's so redundant.
It is, isn't it? Yeah. I have a question about casting. Something just kind of hit me with reactions to this after it came out, because, like, predictably, there's, a bunch of people, but this actor is South Asian and Newton, how can this be happening? There's no reason to run through it. You know exactly how that always goes, which is what kind of struck me watching the reactions is kind of a thought of, I know Russell actually likes this actor.
Nathaniel Curtis.
I know RTD actually likes him. He was in It's a Sin. He wasn't like a main character of It's a Sin, but he was kind of like on the second rung of characters. And so I totally believe RTD, thinks this guy's great and thought, I'll get this guy I like to play Isaac Newton. It'll be great. And then we have a character beat with 14 going, am I bi now? And, there's a whole thing actually comes from kind of, we cast a really attractive man as Newton. So it's not just a totally random thing. Like the episode is doing stuff with, we cast a really attractive guy to play Isaac Newton. With like the Star Beast, there was all the over, rows and pronouns and everything like that. With Maker of Toys, I'm sure there'll be something, I don't know what yet, but there'll be something that people will, over how dare Russell, he cast he with this and, that person's there. Do you think there's any extent to which, I'm trying to figure out how I can phrase this in the best way. Is there any extent to which Russell talks to some of the conservative magazines, right? I know it was much to the consternation of some people. He doesn't totally shut them out. He will do some kind of interaction with, these different lines of UK media. His job is to sell the show, and that doesn't mean just talking, the same types of publications. He tries to course the show and its energy through all sorts of places. Is there any extent to which Russell kind of...
Are you asking if he's baiting the conservative press or that kind of thing?
Yeah. I'm not saying it's his primary motivation or his only motivation, certainly, but do you think there's any function of that where he is sort of counting on, and this will continue sparking discourse about the episode over the week like I want to happen? Am I being like super cynical there, or do you think there's any part of him which is like, he has to be aware of it?
I think you'd be naive not to pick up on that.
I think there may be a more idealistic element with RTD, almost in the sense that the trolling, and I think it is a kind of a form of trolling, isn't necessarily just for like the press or like for that reason, but I think there's almost a sense of like, do you remember how Moff was talking about a long time ago, Moff's infamous quotes about how we're going to reimagine history and how it's much gnashing of teeth at him for that and thin ice and all that stuff. I think there is almost a sense that maybe that RTD shares with him, which is that like, we're making strides, or we're doing something really cool by kind of trolling the racists like that as just like a general ambient concept. And it's just, maybe it doesn't even necessarily need to be like this mercenary thing of this will keep people talking about my episode, because the episode's doing plenty, I think.
Yeah.
It's more a sense of like, well, if we establish this is the kind of show we are, then that's like, I guess, some kind of progressive cred for us and for the show, like a general positive thing.
It was just like the bend of the reactions to the episode were just so similar to the Star Beast to me. It just made me kind of think, I'd like the PR people that work for Bad Wolf or Disney or BBC or whatever, is this like a thing they plan through? I'm not at all saying this is like a cynical mastermindy and therefore if we cast so-and-so, we'll get an uptick in social reactions 48 hours. I'm not suggesting that. I just wonder, because they obviously know this happens. They're not in like fairyland where they think, and everyone's going to love that we cast this lovely actor. They'll know that some people won't, and they know there'll be social media energy over that. I'm just curious if like in their like, when they plan out the arc of how the reactions are going to go and how things are going to get talked about, is this like an actual thing they count on? Because it's so repetitive, the audience reactions to the exact same sorts of things. Sometimes it doesn't even make sense how they're reacting. Like I talked in the Star Beast one hour, I don't even think they'd get when... Sometimes Russell is kind of mildly on the side, I think, of the people gnashing their teeth. Or at least he's kind of throwing them the smallest little bone. And I don't think they don't even realize that because they react in such a predictable way. I'm just curious if there's like a plan by the PR people involved with the show to like, and this will do that, and that'll do that, and that'll do that, because it's so predictable. I don't know, it's interesting to think about.
I'm going to be honest, if there was a plan, I wish there wasn't one, because I kind of don't like the idea of like a mostly white creative team just casually deciding to explode a racism bomb in the faces of everyone for no reason. Oh, it's so great that the actor now has people in his Twitter mentions accusing him of erasing white history and doing all that shit. Like, it's so annoying.
When they hire like an actor like this, like Nathaniel Curtis, does he get like a talk, like where they say like, you're gonna have a lot of fun doing this, and you'll love interacting with everyone, and if you really like the show, you can con around all the time, even for a small role if you want, but be aware you're gonna get blah 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 blah. Like, do you think they get that talking, or do they just get it talked positively? Like, I'm curious how it's presented to them when obviously all the producers know this will happen when you hire someone like this. I guess there's no way we know. Yeah. Anyway, I guess connected to this, when Tennant says he was so hot, oh, is that who I am now? And Donna basically says it was never that far from the surface. What did you think of that beat?
I appreciate that they foregrounded it.
I think it's. I find it hard not to enjoy over homosexuality in Doctor Who. I think that's something that RTD is very good at, and I'm glad that we're bringing it right to the surface now.
What do you think of the accusation that actually RTD is wrong for having the Doctor suddenly realise this because it happened before? Because I think there's questionable grounds to that, because like some people pointing to, well, Eccleston kissed Jack Harkness, in his ear and stuff like that, but also feel like it does feel significant to me to overtly be doing it with Tennant, and specifically here, because that feels like something that actually hasn't quite happened before. I feel like Tennant's Doctor was very overall pretty hetero-coded on the whole, so it does feel like a significant break a little bit to be doing it explicitly, and it feels like a way in which the show feels comfortable now in a way it didn't necessarily feel comfortable to do something quite like this 9 years ago.
What do we think about having the Doctor be curious and surprised by queerness when we have had a queer dynamic to some extent in the show, just in the last incarnation?
Did we?
Exactly. My thoughts exactly.
Yeah, I agree with Gig. 14's playing on 10. It was a fairly romantic sexual being, but pretty much with women, and often blonde women in particular. So, I think it's just one of those 14-10 differences. He's nicer now, he's less of an ego now, he gurns less now, he's gayer now. It's just another... I think it's directly a kind of interaction with 10 more than, interacting with 13, 12, 11. This
is something we're going to see more and more of going forward, isn't it? I think based on some of the things that we're seeing about the shooty Doctor, I think that we're headed for even more overt homosexuality in Doctor Who. Not only in Doctor Who, but in the Doctor himself, which is nice.
I think it's great because that's part of what made RTD1 work and feel distinct from a lot of other permutations of the show, was let's make the Doctor more of a romantic sexual being. I think it makes sense for RTD2 to say, if this is what they're doing with 15, let's dial that up a notch. Like, why not? It worked great before. Let's try varying that, in the context we're in now, the 2020s.
Yeah, there's no reason for the show to be afraid of overt queerness, because, you just look at how RTD1 went, it was kind of all over the place, whether it was subtext or just overt text.
Something bad with this episode, because there's actually a lot of quibbles I have with it. I don't know if it's more or less than you two, but there's a lot of things I dislike about it. But I'm glad we're front-loading with the love. This is like the most minor issues of the episode, but the Starbeast looked fantastic because so much of it was real. It was very, very physical. It was out on real streets. It was very, very tangible. This episode is like the absolute exact opposite. This is mostly green screen corridors. RTD even joked about how, of all episodes, this is similar to, it's probably Underworld, if it's going to be any of them, because, Underworld is that terrible, compositing of Four and Leela against these crazy... Well, no, they're not crazy, they're boring backgrounds. They just look crap how they're put against them.
I think people expect you to base episodes on old episodes, or classic episodes like Genesis of the Daleks and The Caves of Androzani, or Blink, or, The Timeless Child. I don't think anyone really expected me to base an episode on Underworld, because that's what we've done. We've got special effects corridors all the way through. We've got corridors that the cast aren't really in, just like they did all those years ago. That probably took you by surprise, and I'm very proud. We worked very hard on that. I'm very proud of it, but be honest, tell me what you think.
This had a lot of that. I don't think it looked terrible or anything, but it was just much more of, oh yeah, this is Doctor Who, all right, when they're just kind of oddly positioned against the background just in a way that you can feel there's not a reality there, the way you could feel the Starbeast, or the way you can feel at the end when they return to Camden. I'm not making some huge condemnation there. It's Doctor Who, and it looks fine. It's just the last episode looked so good that I felt like, oh, we're back in regular mode now.
Yeah, I don't want to look a gift horse in the mouth, I suppose, but I did kind of find myself wondering, would this have worked better if they were working to a tighter budget and they had to use a real corridor, build a real corridor from a corridor that exists? I wondered whether the Waters of Mars style,
like a less impressive spaceship. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and if even were it I think when you go back and watch certain RTD ones, I think I think specifically of something like the Shadow Proclamation, Journey's End, of Stolen Earth, and you know these sets look cheap, but they kind of they kind of are serviceable because they're so cheap, because they're running such a tight budget. There's real love and concern and fret poured into those sets. And I think I sort of yearn for those days a little bit. But having said that, I have been for years, so I don't think that's something we'll ever really return.
I would say the moment they step out into the giant CGI corridor, the giant green screen thing, it did feel like we'd stepped back into RTD1 visually a little bit.
Yeah.
That sense of just the quality of the CGI like in there. It's not that it was like 2005 quality CGI, but the sense that the slight watery unreality of it felt a bit video gamey in the way that old kind of slightly low budget CGI does, which, you know, it is kind of a shame. Like, obviously it would be better if it looked more convincing. It wasn't a convincing effect. But I would say there is a certain vibe that CGI environment has, particularly when all the panels start rippling around. There's this kind of underwater feeling to it, this slight feeling of unreality to it, which I wouldn't say is not some brilliant, genius, intentional thing. But I think it does visually suggest just like the overreaching ambition of the episode and trying to make this happen, which I sort of enjoy. Like, there are lots of visual aspects of the episode that I like, and there are some that are kind of like, Like, the use of VFX to create, like, the shape-shifting, fucked-up creatures, I think that's really enjoyable. Yeah. Because that's deliberately gesturing at something uncanny and surreal and freakish. Whereas the attempt to kind of create a convincing environment, like with the corridor, maybe it doesn't quite come off as well. But then you have the exterior of the spaceship when we see it, when we see a little camera drone flying out around there. Later on when we see it explode. I think those shots were basically fine, I thought. I felt they were pretty much like up to par.
The show's really good at that sort of thing. Exterior spaceships, yeah.
Yeah, like, you know, stuff floating in darkness. Yeah, exterior is great. So it really is just, looking at the behind the scenes and how they had that previs kind of set up. So where they moved the camera in the green screen, they could see the CGI corridor kind of moving around Tennant and Tate. I mean, stuff like that is so cool. But again, it is almost a sense of like overt, augmented reality, artificial reality, not really like a convincing, solid, real like place.
Those shots are really stunning, aren't they? With the drones coming out of the ship and sort of swirling around, and there's a really wonderful big sci-fi Hollywood Murray score behind it. I think it's beautiful. Yeah, I think it feels above Doctor Who in a way. It feels like something that Doctor Who almost shouldn't be. It felt a bit like watching Trial of a Time Lord, the opening sequence. It was slightly too sexy for Doctor Who.
I think the effects that matter the most look great too. Like, Jimbo was real. The robot, I mean, he's not a real robot. He's like a real puppet kind of thing, but he looks solid and tangible because he is actually a real thing they've made with love. Obviously, Tennant, there's not actually two Tennants, much as we might all wish for that. So we had actor doubles, and, you know, all the traditional filmmaking stuff to get, how do we get the same actor twice in the same frame? That was all looked seamless to me. And the actual body horror of the long arms and stuff, which they actually did for real for the most part. Like, they it's like actually Tennant's arms that they've like scanned in and they've blown up to like make the model. I think all that looked quite good because that's actually in the camera, what they've made there. So I think the effects that matter the most were realer and therefore looked better. It's just kind of the general background environment is the watery thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Occasionally you get a shit one, like when fake Tennant bends over and put his head between his legs, and it kind of looks like incredibly fake. It's like, oh dear. And then they almost like speed up the footage as he starts crawling after Donna. It's like, what is this, Chuckle Brothers? What the hell's going on there? So there's quite a contrast between the effects that really work and the effects that don't quite, the ones that don't stick out more, I think, because the ones that work so well.
Do you guys think maybe it's unfortunate that Tom Kingsley got this episode and Rachel Talalay got the Star Beast and not the other way around?
I think he needed a really, really, really strong director to bring the show back in like a movie mode, which is what the Star Beast is. Like, I think that had to be her. Tom Kingsley, I think I've got off on the wrong foot because it really annoyed it. This has nothing to do with how he visually directs stuff, but he's like merely mouthing about child pornography in terms of hiring Chris Langham after why he left the thick of it because he was in a child porn. And then, Tom Kingsley making a big deal of, oh, well, he's different now. And then, being the first one excited about making a film with him after that. That's very frustrating. And like, it's kind of put me on the wrong foot with everything to start with. But even if I try, I mean, I can't remove that from my brain, but even if I tried, visually, I don't have a lot of specific things I can call out like I did for the Star Beast that like really blew me away with the visuals or the camera movements or everything. But I guess he's got less to work with, Kingsley, here as well than the Star Beast. I don't know. Gig, what do you think?
I mean, I would say direction isn't just prettiness, because I think there's a lot of sequences in this episode where, a really long dialogue between the actors or groups of actors, and I think those need to come off really well. You need to like have the back and forth between the actors go really well. You need to frame those in a way that the story is told directly and concisely and clearly. And I think there's a lot of points where that way it does work, and where the like exchanges between the characters are framed pretty well, and kind of the story is told in a way it works pretty well. So I don't really know. Like, I don't think we haven't. To take that question about Talalay, for example, I don't think we've really seen Talalay do an episode like this, to be honest. Like, we've seen her do Heaven Sent, which, again, that uses CGI and stuff and crazy locations, but it's still not quite the same kind of thing as this. It doesn't have, like, the giant kind of magic flinging CGI corridor or the giant chasing monster heads or anything like that. So I think it's just an imaginary thing at the end of the day. I don't think we can really say, oh, would another director have, like, done it better or whatever.
So Tom Kingsley is a good read of character because he made the dialogues work so well, is where Gig's arriving there.
I don't know if I go that far. I think more, I think a lot of it is like just letting the actors do kind of what they do. And but also like just generally, in terms of realizing a script like this, which asks for so much, I think there is a degree of also just like, how do you solve the problems, the countless problems that this introduces? And also, there's a lot of storyboarding as well. So, for example, the giant chase scene, I guess about the halfway mark, when we first meet the Not Things and they start chasing the Doctor and Donna down the corridor, like a sequence like that, there's a huge amount of work that has to go into it on the perspective, like the director, the storyboarders, the arts team, the VFX team, in terms of actually putting that together. Because on paper, like that's just a few lines, right? That's not going to be, it's not going to be like carefully mapped out by RTD necessarily. So, just making that even coherent is just a massive task in itself. And I love that sequence. Like, that's the bit where that really hooked me into the episode. Because, as the giant morphing Doctor and Donna look so fucked up and, like, feral as they're chasing this little hovercart thing down the road. I mean, there's something about that is so entertaining. And there's such a kinetic sense when we see the giant hand grabbing onto the thing. And, like, when giant Donna smashes it and starts spinning out of control. All of that, like, the sense of motion there is conveyed really well.
Yeah. Tom Kingsley has a really interesting tweet thread just working through mostly the special effects and how he accomplished everything. So he did pull off a lot of interesting stuff really well. I love that the robot was totally physical as well. That's really, really cool. He's very complimentary to the VFX guys who, of course, heroes of the episode to get it working at all.
The robot is actually fantastic because I think it's the kind of thing you could easily, it's not foolproof. You could easily have fucked that up. But I think the fact that the robot, just as it's like this doesn't talk, it doesn't have like a character particularly, but the design of it makes it look determined, even though it's an inanimate object. And that really conveys the story because it's kind of an after image of the dead captain and her grim purpose of destroying these creatures. Just having this hard-working, very old little robot just plodding along one step at a time. And the way it has kind of a sort of mouth-shaped kind of line on it and some eye-shaped kind of lenses on it. It just really, it's cute, but it's cute in a way that kind of makes you want to kind of cuddle it out of sympathy, almost. Like, it looks sad in a lot of ways. I think it's just a great bit of design, and it's a great motif to have recurring throughout the episode, just this thing taking a step every so often. It gives the episode a great rhythm.
Speaking of rhythm, around 8 minutes in, I could swear a good man was starting to swell up. Did you guys hear that?
I wouldn't say it stuck out to me, but I mean, I like a lot of the stuff Gold is doing throughout this episode. Like, not so much ostentatious stuff, but just effective atmospheric stuff. I think there was a lot of cool stuff there.
There was a Twin Peaksy bit of music around 14 minutes in as well that stuck out at me. There's a lot of interesting music going on here. What do you think of, what is Murray doing with, he's like, it's almost like he's cock blocking. Like in the Star Beast, he kept kind of invoking an old cue and then not going all the way through with it. Except for I'm the Doctor, which he did do really in a big celebratory way, and he played it all the way through and everything, that section of it. But like the bits of Donna's theme we got in the Star Beast were usually just kind of, they did the first bit, then they kind of trailed off. Flavia's theme, I mean, we got a decent one of that, actually. But in this one, when we get This Is Gallifrey, it's kind of, it's building. Then we get the first really iconic bit, and then it really sharply cuts out. What did you think of that?
That seems probably very deliberate to me, especially considering even as the Doctor talks about Gallifrey, he himself cuts off because like, oh, actually no, Gallifrey got blown up again or something like that. So it's a sense of deliberately averted nostalgia, which seems relevant to, I guess, the almost like the broken relationship that this Doctor has with the past, with the law, with all that stuff that's causing him incredible trauma, as we see with the flux and whatnot.
That was so interesting.
I think a lot of this, the cock blocking, as you describe it, with certain themes. We've been getting bits of the Doctor forever. We've been getting subtle background hints of all the strange creatures. I think that, forgive the fan brain, that I think we're to be expecting some big renditions of those themes, at least the Doctor Forever in the Giggle. I think we're slowly building to certain things. Donna's theme got quite a few lovely reprises this episode, didn't it? And I think we should be expecting similar for the Doctor Forever. I'm
just like a big dog salivating. Like I've been Pavlovian conditioned by his first 10 series, and I'm just waiting as he starts baiting me with it, and I'm panting and I'm waiting for the big reprises, and then he keeps denying me, but maybe he's edging me for the Giggle. Yeah, perhaps.
I think that's what is to expect.
I think also because this episode is about like two cracked mirrors of the Doctor and Donna, I think it makes sense to expect maybe slightly cracked or incomplete versions of their themes as well, just kind of fluttering through the episodes.
The Flux and the Timeless Child stuff, it was so interesting that I couldn't really even sort out how I felt. The first time I watched it, I was just like when I first watched The Timeless Children, it was just like such a huge thing to happen that I thought I can't process this right now. My brain needs to tick over this, after a good night's sleep. There's so many ways to approach this. The first is a lot of people, even people who liked Chibnall's era, some of them would have felt like, well, we move on. Eras don't have to interact with each other heaps, especially when they're not coming from two creatives that really click into each other loads like some do. So to connect to the past era in a big way like that is a big move. And it's not one RTD needed to take. In the press, RTD said all the right things with, obviously he's good friends with Chris Chibnall, and he says all the complimentary things. No, I'm not going to erase, blah, blah, I loved what he did, blah, blah, blah. That's enough as well. You can just say that and believe that, and then you don't need your episodes to connect with the last. There's no expectation. You don't need to do that. You've never needed to do that. You've never needed to actually link in what you're doing with what the last person did. So the first kind of step of it is to bring in the Flux and the Timeless Child as a characterization thing he didn't need to do. Like he was already respecting the Chibnall era. This is a bigger move. This is incorporating it, and he's actually trying to do something with it, which is really interesting. And it gets super interesting when you think about, and he's not even really doing it in a way that, I've watched the Flux a lot, and I don't think what RTD's suggesting here is actually what the Vanquishers were suggesting. I think I don't even know if retcon's the right word, because it's so vague how Flux does and doesn't deal with itself, that it might just be an honest to God, this is what I think happened from RTD's perspective, or this is what should have happened. It's really hard to see how this is interacting with Chibnall's ideas, because Chibnall's ideas about Flux were so vague. The way the episode is interacting with the Timeless Child, though, is really easy to read, because we know what the Timeless Child is. The Doctor's not actually from Gallifrey, he's not sure where he's from, and the episode very straightforwardly kind of plays off that. 14 is shaken when the no thing Donna knows that, basically, that you're not actually sure. Are you? You're thinking you're not from Gallifrey anymore, and that really freaks you out. That is a really straightforward interaction with the Timeless Child, but the Flux one is weird. What do you guys, like, does that actually line up with the Vanquishers? I don't think it does. I don't think, was he,
I think RTD had to make a choice about what he wants, like, the Flux to be, because I think what he's doing is slotting it in to his own aims, I think. Because I think as we see, both at the end of this episode and at the end of the Star Beast, I think, at least with this mini-series, RTD is trying to do something about the 14th Doctor and his pain, I guess. Contrasted with, like, Donna wanting him to open up and wanting him to kind of stick around and, like, you know, express his feelings and do all that. And it shows some self-interest rather than forever be self-tormenting. So I think having something like the Flux, as vague as it is, it's adaptable to RTD's purposes. So in this case, RTD adapts it into, okay, half the universe has been destroyed. We're going to make a decision. We're going to say half of it is half destroyed, or thereabouts. And we're going to say that the Doctor is very cut up about that. So I think it's slotting in as kind of, it's not quite the same thing as obviously the Ninth Doctor's PTSD from the Time War, but lots of stuff's been destroyed and it's vaguely related to the Doctor, so we can kind of treat it like the same thing, as long as we set it at a level where we can still do stories, so there is enough universe left for Doctor Who to keep going, but enough of it has also been destroyed that the Doctor can feel really cut up about it, and it can feel like a big guilt thing that he can scream and shout about and be really upset about. So I think broadly he's just adapting it so that it suits his broader goals, I think, because as we can see at the end of this episode, Donna is kind of asking the Doctor about his pain, and stuff like the Flux, I think, is a good symbol for the it's a symbol for the suffering and the devastation that the Doctor has gone through since RTD1, since Donna left.
I think RTD is maybe a bit of an obsessive completionist, and I'm not sure how much he could bear the thought of leaving these things alone in the way that Chris Chibnall did in his 2022 specials. And I think that, given that he's a seasoned writer and a very good writer, a very capable writer, it comes across well, and it feels to me a nice way to leave some of these ideas. I'm not sure how much Flux angst we're going to see post this. I understand there's a possibility that we'll see Timeless Child rehashes here and there, but I'm not sure how much emotion, how many real emotional beats we're going to see from the Flux, if at all, in future. And I think that's RTD's completions and coming through. I think also I don't disagree with what Gig was saying at all, in that I think you only have to look back at Rose in 2005 to understand that RTD doesn't want to, in creating his own eras of and new beginnings of the same show, he's not rewriting any of the previous things. He's happy to take on influences that he feels are appropriate, or even in a sense, not necessarily stuff that he likes, just stuff that he feels is baked into the concept of the show, and to repurpose it, even if not retcon it entirely, repurpose it to fit the shape of the new life of the show.
I think you're right about this maybe being like a full stop on Flux stuff. Maybe not the last, but the last time it really... I think this might be a sense of RTD doing closure for this, and we'll see how that goes. But I think, because the issue is, I think, with stuff like the Flux, and the universe has been X% destroyed, is that in terms of emotional stakes, it was a crap idea when Logopolis did it. It was a crap idea when Chibnall sort of did it, and it's still a crap idea. And now RTD has formalized it because it's so incomprehensible in scale. Like the size of the universe itself has decreased, and like countless bits of universe are gone. I mean, you can't actually. It cannot really physically, materially change how stories or the setting within Doctor Who actually work. All you can do is occasionally have a character go, "Man, it's so sad we lost all that universe. Remember when the universe existence itself had larger boundaries and there were like 10 billion more planets than there are now?" Like it doesn't actually fit into a story of like characters and people and real things because it's just so ridiculous to even try to manage. So I think it's a very airy fairy abstract sort of concept, the idea that part of the universe has just been deleted. Like it's really tough to actually mine emotional stakes from that as a going concern. I mean, even here, like we get this thing about how, well, not Donna says to the Doctor, "Well, it wasn't your fault," and the Doctor's like, "I know," and I think that kind of conveys, like, as much as that is riffing on what actually happened in Flux, because it wasn't the Doctor's fault really. It kind of shows how it's a bit difficult to even like really get like stuff out of that. Like it's always kind of avoidant, I think, because it's just such a huge thing to try and make sense of. So I think it would be difficult to really try and engage with Flux a lot going forward. Which is why I think, Tyler, you're probably right that this might see like essentially a wrap up on that whole Flux thing.
I really liked I know it's not my fault. I felt that felt distinct from the Time War angst to me here. The Flux not being the Doctor's fault, actually, I don't like. The Flux is it's a very abstract conflict. We can put it that way. It's quite hard to track emotionally and thematically what's really like. The Doctor's mum unleashed the Ravagers because. And there's a lot of like anger and villainy going on there, and the Ravagers are just very chaotic, and Tecteon's really evil. It's very distanced from the Doctor's characterization. Like the Time War works so well because it worked so well for a while because you can mine so much out of like the Doctor's agency is the key thing with the Time War there. He killed his own people and he killed the Daleks, and so when that gets invalidated by some of them coming back. His rage over that is really, we can really feel that. So what was the point of me killing everything if, some of these can come back? And we process through, how do I feel about killing everyone? Can I kill everyone again? Like the show can mine a lot of character stuff out of the Time War because it was the Doctor's fault how it ended. That was a very active choice he made. Whether it was the 9th or the 8th or, the retcon Doctor, that comes from the Doctor. The Flux, it's hard to even understand the Flux from the characters who it is from. And those characters aren't the Doctor. So it not being their fault is a kind of nice thing in this way, in that I think it kind of differentiates. 9 and 10 had angst because they were involved. I feel like those sort of Doctors were also the sorts to blame themselves in a kind of, do I want to use this word, in a kind of patronizing, let's say, way, where, I'm the man in charge of everything and, everything's my fault because I'm implicitly in charge. I think 9 and 10 were sort of those Doctors as well. So I think 14 again feels distinct in that he's like, yes, I get that it wasn't my fault. Whereas I think 10 might have been the type to go, but everything's my fault because I have the power, and if I couldn't do it, and it's my responsibility to do all that. I feel like I'm overanalyzing a small beat, but that did kind of feel significant to me. 14's like, yes, I know it wasn't actually my fault, but I can still be sad about it, right? I'm still upset that it happened, and I'm upset that I'm not involved in causing it, but it was, an event that I was party to. Does what I'm saying there make sense at all?
Yes, yeah, and I agree.
I do think like the language though, because even like right before he admits, I know it wasn't my fault. Like before then he says like, creation I devastated. So even as he admits it's not his fault, he's still kind of taking on that responsibility in a sense, like in his head. Like he feels like he devastated it, even though we know emphatically that he didn't. And he knows that he didn't. So it's like, it's still kind of happening. And I think it kind of needs to happen. Otherwise, like where does the real torment come from? Because, this isn't just him grieving a dead universe. This is him feeling like it's to do with him. Because the Doctor's crazy adopted mother was like, oh, I'm killing this universe to kill you. Fuck you, Doctor. So it's like a completely very abstract kind of intangible chain of responsibility, which doesn't really exist. But if you take that away, if the Doctor is just, it wasn't my fault at all, I'm just grieving the universe that's sad, I don't feel complicit in it, then the scene won't be as strong because it isn't actually a sense of inner conflict. And I think what the scene is actually doing is when you get the not Donna kind of melting into goo and going, haha, you have owned this universe, you're such a prize because what you have been involved with, what you have done, you are the great monster, or whatever. That's kind of part of what adds to the horror for the Doctor as he runs away from her and starts freaking out later. So if you take that out, it's not quite as powerful.
I love that this episode's interaction with the Chibnall era, I think, is actually really linked into it's really linked into my absolute favorite line from the episode, which is to do with the Nothing Doctor's tie when it disappears, and he goes, "Oh, I see. When something is gone, it keeps existing." And I love that. This is how RTD's kind of approaching the Chibnall era. It would have been so easy to just not mention it and just move on. And no one could have begrudged him that, because he's very positive about Chibnall in the press. Like, he's done everything right. It sounds like I'm being very mechanical when I say that. I'm not implying that RTD like secretly, I hate these episodes, but if I say I like them enough, then I'm fooling that doesn't even make sense. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying, in terms of the brand, he's done all the right stuff and he's stayed positive and everything. But he didn't need to do anything more. But to actually pull into the story, no, I want to link into the last stuff. I think it threw me for a loop at first, but when I thought about it and when I rewatched the episode, I've really swung around to liking it, because I think it's kind of, I don't know if brave's the right word, but I think it's cool to go, this is what we got. What can I do with this? Because that's what Moffat did to Russell. I hate to be like thing is like other thing, but that, Moffat looked at what Russell had done and he thought, I'm going to come at it in a different direction, but what can I mine for my own characters out of what he did, or my take on what he did? And I feel like we're getting that there. The Timeless Child thing, it feels like Russell's playing along the same sorts of lines as Chibnall. He doesn't know who he is. That's kind of interesting. The Flux stuff, it's kind of like he's playing on a different line, but I think it is kind of cool, and it's taking a big step to go, no, I will play with the toys from the last person. It's not a piece of fine china like Moffat told Chibnall, and I like that that's kind of circled back around. And I feel like whether you did or didn't like the Chibnall era, or did or didn't like Flux, I think there's a kind of greater, I don't know if unity is the word, but to kind of, and honor isn't the right word, but to kind of say, this is what happened, and this is how we're going to channel it through the next thing. I think there's a kind of maybe integrity to that. It's like we're not just kicking the Flux off in its own little corner and going, yeah, they never really made any sense of what happened in the end there. Let's move on. It's not kind of the TV movie where people just didn't really touch the half-human thing. I kind of like here that going, no, we will touch it. And if you liked the Flux, maybe like, oh, isn't that cool that the ripple effects continue on? And if you didn't like the Flux, maybe like, oh, thank God Russell fixed that and actually gave some weight to what happened. I just think there's a kind of integrity to kind of doing something with what the last guy did there. And, I really disliked Flux and I really disliked the Timeless Children. But I think it is kind of cool to like, it's not throwing a tantrum and it's not ignoring them, which would have been the easy thing. I just think this is kind of cool to actually kind of play with those toys and move on with them. I like that instinct. I didn't feel that at first. I had to really kind of chew that over in my head to come to that realization. But I don't. Gig, how did you feel? Did you feel similar to me or different from me?
Well, I felt inevitably that kind of sense of dread the moment RTD actually like nails down a Chib thing, like a terrible Chib stories having actually mattered in some form. That's always going to annoy me. I'm never ultimately going to be pleased with that kind of thing, because I think it's really awkward to peg yourself in any way to a story that's just so fundamentally slapdash. I mean, it's one of those things where I wish Flux would retroactively go missing, because people's idea of what that story might be is inevitably better than what it actually is. So stuff like that, it's kind of a pain. But I do think in terms of the purpose for the overall specials and like what this 60th thing kind of is and what 14 represents in reverting to 10 and kind of summing up, I guess, the history of New Who, like all of the stuff that's gone through, I think it is kind of necessary for the concept to be complete and make sense that it does somehow incorporate or acknowledge everything that has happened. Because I think, it's not in the sense of like, completionism, but in the sense of it would be weird to leave a hole, I think a conspicuous hole, and try and do like, la, 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 we're not listening. If the whole point of what you're trying to do is represent everything the Doctor has been through certainly since we saw Tennant last, but more also just in general.
Yeah.
I think the specials are trying to like build that to something, certainly with him and Donna.
I think what it is, if like the episodes had blatantly ignored all the Chibnall era stuff, or they'd just done a very pithy little line about it, I would have had probably a slight bit of smug satisfaction, like, hey, I didn't like the Timeless Children either. Lol, RTD didn't like it as well. I would have had a brief bit of smug satisfaction over that. Like, I'm not going to lie about that. Yeah, I would have. But what I got in this episode was so much better, in that the interaction between Tennant and the Nothing Tate was good. Like, they were playing that scene really well. And it was a big surprise to me when she mentioned the Flux and the music was serious. That was like kind of an unnerving moment where I'm like, this is weird that the episode's doing this. I don't know how I feel about this. And inherently, that's a more interesting feeling than just like, lol, he hates the thing that I hate. And then to actually use that for a character moment of like 14 opening up a little bit, that's more interesting than me just going lol. And then when 14 goes down into the blue like hatches thing underneath, and it's my favorite scene of the episode where he's just opened up, and he doesn't love to do that, and especially not to do with like Laurie stuff like Gallifrey and things like that. He's just opened up to Donna, and he can only really open up to Donna because they're so close. And he's even saying at the end, like, I appreciate you, I'm so glad you're back. And then she melts away, and it's not just that he had their identity wrong, she's laughing at him and she's mocking him, and he runs down. It's just this beautiful, emotional, alive scene where 14's bashing the ship, and he's just so frustrated. And it's such a relatable thing, isn't it, when you've opened up to someone and then you've realized, oh, I actually miscalculated here. It was a very vulnerable thing for me to open up, and I was looking at parts of myself I didn't want to really look at, but I trusted that person so much I did it. And then when that's thrown back in your face, it's one of the worst feelings you can ever feel, right? And so we see Tennant physically embodying, how it feels to feel that, and he's so alive and physical and beautiful. And this is just what a memorable scene for him to do that. Like, that's part of why the scene was in, the old trailers. It's because it's such a memorable physical acting scene, and I'm relating to him and I can feel his emotions. And all this stuff that I'm babbling about is so much better than just going, lol, I don't like the Timeless Child either, right?
I think Tennant sells it wonderfully, and between RTD and Tennant, the emotional fallout from the Flux, of which there was essentially none in Chibnall's own era, is reaped for real content and given real time, and it's done well. And it sold me that the Doctor really felt it, and that it's something that's stuck in his brain. And in universe, it reflects badly on 13, who now appears so unfeeling, careless, and I think that's the unfortunate downside. I think that's genuinely not an intention of RTD's, but it comes as a result of the blandness and the lack of heart and the lack of emotion in the previous era. And I think that's something we have to acknowledge. I think that's something we have to acknowledge is that in retroactively making the Flux interesting, we've also retroactively made 13 a bad person for not seeming to care.
Yeah, the difficulty is that, like, RTD is showing all this trauma and kind of guilt and pain and suffering and obsession, like, in the Doctor. And we saw those episodes. We know, like, we saw what 13 actually went through and how she actually reacted to stuff and how she was actually talking, feeling. I think the excuse, I think, that is going to be quite common, which is just, she was just keeping a lid on it. She was just keeping it all inside. I mean, that is retroactive cope, ultimately, because we saw how those episodes were working, right? So I think ultimately the difficulty for RTD is that he's writing about kind of trauma that wasn't actually there. Like, it wasn't real in those stories that he's writing about. So he has to kind of summon it from nowhere. We have to just kind of join him and pretend, like, for the sake of this story, that it was there and that it was real at the time. It's kind of awkward.
It's such an interesting point you've raised. I think it's one of the most interesting things about these specials in general. What you're bringing up here is the 60th anniversary, and RTD2 in general, is from an entirely different creative force and team and collaboration than the Chibnall era, which was an entirely different creative force team than the Moffat era. Then there was a bit of crossover between RTD1 and Moffat. Not as much as you might think. There was a bit. But these are discrete eras, basically. We know this because we nerd out about Chibnall did this and RTD did that, Moffat did that, because that fascinates us. But the regular viewer, I mean, a lot of them, they get that RTD's back. They get this as a different writer than before, because that's very publicized. But I think the intricacies of how these episodes relate to each other is a lot more opaque. This is why a lot of fans, expect the Guardians of the Edge to come back, or they expect, things from the Centenary to... the fact that Centenary and the 60th kind of share a couple of ideas, that has to feel like if you're an iPlayer and you go... I know they've separated the show out into, like, different incarnations now with, like, New Who, but if you're watching episodes in a row, it's a eminently reasonable thing to expect. Hey, even if the style is different, that last episode relates to the next episode, right? That's normal to expect. It's abnormal that we know it doesn't relate at all, right? And that the Centenary was just kind of going to end. And that Tennant coming back wasn't Chibnall's decision, and that this all came from a different creative force. That's what we know. But if you're watching the episode yourself, you're just like, well, Tennant regenerates, and that's the end of the episode. I don't think it's as clear that this is an entirely different thing, made months later by completely different people. So I think it's normal for people to expect more connections than are actually there. For us, it's very clear that retconning isn't the right word exactly, but this is an entirely different creative interpretation of Flux made by people who had absolutely nothing to do with Flux. What RTD is saying about the Doctor here, he's saying, and he had absolutely nothing to do with the 13th Doctor's characterization. It's completely cleaved. It's like an appropriation thing now. It's a reflective thing. It's a reinterpretation, not an interpretation now, which is like a totally just how cut off it is from each other is kind of the interesting thing about it. And I think that must be more opaque to some viewers, right? If you're watching it in order to like not get that this is a reevaluation by entirely different people. I think that makes sense of why you're getting some of the wacky expectations with the 60th is if the less you realize that, the more you might think the centenary connects to things, the more you might expect stuff to recur when it's been made by completely different people, so it's not going to. I think that's a really interesting kind of point that this is a reevaluation because it's from entirely different people. So there is this kind of split of, we saw how the 13th Doctor actually handled things, which is she didn't care. And we saw, that was this statement of the Chibnall era. It's not like this is from different people. So this isn't retroactively saying 13 actually did care, she just hit it. Or she didn't, because we saw everything Chris Chibnall had to write and Jodie Whittaker had to play. The book is closed. We can't retroactively like say, oh, she did care and she just didn't talk about it, because we're redoing that ourselves now. That's a new idea. That's not what's actually in there, because it's a totally different force.
Leo, you were talking earlier about the emotion in the Doctor asking if it's really Donna and kind of being vulnerable with her and then needing a friend in the moment. And that's it's such a beautiful moment. There are so many of these already in the 60th specials, and it's every time it happens, it's so exciting. These tiny moments of friendship and trust and love and vulnerability that have been so absent to the show for so many years, and I keep trying to explain this to various people, and it's impossible to do it unless you've bore witness to the way that the show has been for so long now, that's been devoid of emotion and devoid of characters that seem to genuinely care about each other and want
physicality as well,
best for each other, and want to physicality and physical kind of
hugging,
physical expressions of emotion and taking Donna's hand and reassuring her.
Oh, I love that.
And kissing her forehead at the end of the episode, and all of these simple things. I think in the last episode, the thing in the Starbase, the thing for me was handing the Donna the sonic screwdriver unthinkingly, and Donna taking it unthinkingly, and just such a beautiful, simple representation, specifically a Doctor Who style, the handling of the sonic screwdriver. That's such a specific Doctor Who beat, that's so heaped in emotion and ideas about love and trust and friendship. And that's the kind of thing that we've been missing for so long. And
it just makes you love these characters. They feel like real people.
Also, it's a quite cogent illustration of where we are like now in terms of where we were. That last little scene between 14 and Donna in the TARDIS, where Donna's asking him, like, what's going on with you? Are you okay? And obviously we got scenes that would start a bit like this throughout Chibnall Who, where like maybe Yaz or someone would ask like the Doctor, is she okay? They'd be in the TARDIS, the Doctor's brooding, and the Doctor just wouldn't really tell anything. Whereas at the end of this scene, the Doctor ultimately, although he is withholding a lot still, he does ultimately admit that he's not going to be okay for 1,000,000 years, basically. So something is very, very bad. So that's like we've taken a step forward. Something about that scene where the Doctor kind of starts screaming and kind of bashing the walls and stuff earlier that you mentioned. There's an interesting detail, like at the end of it, when he's kind of finally calmed down, before he moves on, he just kind of quietly says to himself, "Good," and then he goes. And I'm fascinated by that. So it's like, do you think is that him saying like, is he ultimately glad that it wasn't the real Donna that he'd opened up to, that he doesn't actually know if the real Donna knows all of this, that he didn't ultimately, like, that he hasn't ultimately changed their relationship in that way by exposing that bit of himself to him? Like, is he ultimately, like, telling himself that, well, okay, fine, like, that was painful, but at least there wasn't any real stakes in it, at least it wasn't the real Donna, like, all of that stuff. What do you think?
That's a really intriguing idea, yeah. I didn't take it that way. I took it as 14 having a 10 style rage moment and then sniffing and stuffing back into action and like the 10th Doctor if he was more of a grown up. But I really love that.
Yeah, I just took it as like a kind of empty word, just, when you kind of calm yourself down. That's a really interesting read gig. That's fascinating. I think
it's such a specific choice of word, I think, to put there. It feels like a big deal to me. It can't be dismissed.
Yeah, that's interesting. What a scene. Like, yeah, I just love that so much. I never could have predicted that. Could you have predicted like a year or two ago that David Tennant reacting to the Timeless Child would be a scene with like about for 20 minutes? Like, that's pretty amazing.
I will say it makes me wish that Donna could have got something even vaguely kind of in the same league. Because, I mean, we this is a two-hander, And you kind of want scenes where both of the actors are kind of really getting to like dig into what they can do. I mean, RTD has kind of said in the behind the scenes he wanted to push them, like see how far they could go. And I feel in this episode we get great exchanges, great scenes for both Tennant and Tate. They're playing the monsters, they're playing themselves. You know, they're in a quite high stakes situation. But I feel like as the Doctor is getting this like massive kind of emotional outburst of the timeless child, like in the equivalent scene that's happening with Donna, she's just babbling about like, you know, an anecdote about how she was born. And ultimately, she kind of gets out of that exchange with the fake Doctor without really touching on really high emotional stakes or anything like that. And I feel like throughout the episode, it's kind of playing it a bit safe with those two. Like there's a moment early on where it seems like the 14th Doctor is about to blame Donna for spilling the coffee and getting them into this trouble, but he restrains himself, and that's good. I like that because it's kind of showing that no, we will not do this. Like they sort the problem out, kind of almost without words. But throughout the preceding episode, it kind of feels like there are opportunities to maybe go even deeper with 14 and Donna, like in the way that maybe you might have seen with like 12 and Clara, to bring up that hypothetical that you were talking about earlier, Tyler. And RTD doesn't quite go that far. I think it's kind of like we get 14 and Donna ultimately. I'm kind of like, even at the end, when the Doctor picks the wrong Donna onto the TARDIS and nearly lets the real one die, ultimately he comes back and saves the real Donna, but they don't talk about it afterwards. It's kind of almost hand-waved away, like it's just not spoken about. I feel like there were opportunities that could have been mined for more, like really intense stuff with the two leads.
She does say, and I agree with you, there's very little. That's not true, actually. I was going to say there's very little for Tate doing the acting. There's loads and loads for Catherine Tate to do, and she does it brilliantly. But there's no big moment like we're talking about with David Tennant, where he's slamming his fist into the wall and he's kicking the wall and whatever. There's no moment like that for her. But there does exist a little nugget in dialogue in that same scene. In which she says that she didn't come all the way to the edge of the universe
to find that she's still dealing with that.
And I think that's such a beautiful, very Donna Noble beat. RTD's so keyed in to this character, and he so clearly adores this character because he's been thinking about it for years. He's been thinking about what she do with a lottery ticket and what's her relationship with her mother like now. And even if Sylvia is nicer and cares more, she can never relinquish herself of the type of relationship that she had with her mother, because she was in her 30s by the time that we met her in 2007. So she was always going to carry this I've been a problem my whole life. Her essential character trait, the one around this character is revealed in the palm of the character's hand here in that line. The heart on the character's sleeve. She runs to the other end of the universe with the Doctor, even now, even with a family of her own, so that she can escape feeling like a burden, like a problem, like just unwanted.
And RTD definitely does like really run with this. His skill of giving the character a monologue that reveals a lot about them. Like, I mean, we get like at least 3 in this episode. Like even before that one, with Don talking about that earlier on, we get her talking. While she's moving those little drawers of gunge or whatever from one drawer to the other, you know, she starts talking about how she imagines her family might react if she never came back. So we get her talking kind of to herself about that. Meanwhile, at the same time, we get the Doctor also talking about what he imagines the TARDIS does when it's off doing the HADs and it's gone away. So just those moments where just the screenplay certainly is just indulging in the character just being able to talk for a bit and to kind of monologue for a bit in a way that's very revealing. And again, it's not quite the same thing as having a really intense sort of a exchange or like face-off between two actors. But certainly it's a lovely little thing that RTD does very well here, just giving them a chance to talk about themselves.
We're swirling around my main issue with the episode, which is early on there was I love this, when Donna and 14 are a bit mad at each other because the TARDIS is zonked away and the Sonic was in the hole, and so that's frustrating. Actually, no, let me rewind. Okay. When they first arrive, they have the exchange about while they're here, coffee in the console. Not your fault, says 14. Yes, it was, says Donna, but then we move on. What are we going to do? Blah, 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 blah. Then when they're mad at each other because the TARDIS is zip-zapped away, they're kind of blaming each other. You're going off wandering. You wandered with me. Blah, 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 blah. Then 14 kind of explodes. You spilt the coffee. Showing that he is actually kind of blaming her, or that he is actually mad about that. And that's really interesting because that's actual tension. Like, obviously they're best of friends. But earlier he's like being the good man and he's like, no. It's not your fault. It's fine. Then we like see underneath that he is actually upset about it, that he is mad at her about it. And then we diffuse it quite quickly where he like says sorry and they move on and they have the physical touch, and that's great. Then the rest of the episode, we get great drama with, who's the real one? And, we get 14 gets the good drama with all the timeless stuff we talked about. Donna doesn't so much with the I'm actually not born in Chiswick stuff. I just feel like these sorts of episodes, like these midnight sort of episodes, what's so great about them, one of the great things about them is it lets you poke the characters in these uncomfortable ways and kind of find the ruptures in them, which, Midnight did. Midnight really kind of aggressively took apart the issues with the 10th Doctor as a character, the ways he was unlikable in certain ways, the way if you kind of distance himself from the humans around him to kind of humanize him and like kind of give the ethos of, oh, he's actually a good guy, bear with him, that his personality is actually kind of odious and can actually very quickly make people turn on him in how arrogant he is. Like, the Midnight did a lot of cool stuff with unpacking the 10th Doctor's character in prickly ways. Over here, I feel like we got angst from the characters and we got all the external threat from the no things really well done. But the coffee thing was just like a brief little flash of what I would have liked the episode to have been, in that an episode like this gives such an opportunity to peel back characters in prickly ways and unlikable ways. And this episode just felt so quick to diffuse any of that and to bring back 14 and Donna to lovey-dovey friendship. We love, yay and touching, and like, that's all really sweet and I love that. But it just felt a bit toothless to me in comparison to similar episodes I can think of from the show, sometimes from RTD himself. Like, RTD is so good at misanthropic writing, even with his own characters he clearly loves. He's so good at that. I felt we kind of had a missed opportunity here in that we never really got that much focus on Donna's interiority at all, as great as Tate was, and we never really got as inside their relationship as I wanted. I think we went inside 14 deeply as a character. I don't think we kind of peeled 14 and Donna's relationship in ways that I think this episode could have done really well. I hate to be like, episode could have been this, because that's not really a criticism exactly, but that bothered me about this episode. I felt it was very quick to kind of diffuse some really effective drama it could have done.
I see where you're coming from, and I agree that some really interesting, really effective drama comes from having your two leads biting at each other. But I think that what you're looking at it from is the perspective of somebody who enjoyed Donna and the Doctor from 14 years ago, as opposed to the way that they're being written now, which is the 14th Doctor is like the 10th Doctor, but older, maturer, wiser, kinder. And Donna as a mother with other responsibilities. I don't think they're those people anymore. I don't think he's as abrasive and argumentative and spiky. And I don't think she has as much stakes in the Doctor Who. It's hard to describe what I mean in the sci-fi story elements of Doctor Who. I think that she's quite specifically grounded in, I have a daughter now and I need to get home. And I think that's what sends her spiraling into
her little breakdown moment, right? Yeah, that the Doctor's doing what that is
in his maturer, wiser standpoint now, sees that and recognizes that, and suddenly it all stops. What you'd normally read out of a Doctor Who episode like this, the character drama where they're biting each other, doesn't happen. She has other responsibilities, and we're looking at a new type of character in the Doctor anyway, and they're both far beyond that as people. They're both older and wiser, and I think that's what that's going for. I think I don't think you're picking up on a flaw in that's something that was dropped, given to us and then dropped. I think that was something that was given to us and then we were told, we don't do that anymore. This is not where these characters are at anymore.
Gig, what do you think?
I do see where both of you are coming from. I think it does seem intentional to me that they kind of have a harmonious relationship, and it's not really and as much as this episode is kind of almost designed to put them in a pressure cooker, they don't really crack at all. That does seem like a conscious choice on RTD's part. But I do think it creates, like I mentioned earlier with the ending, and how you have the Doctor doing that clever test to find out which Donna is the real one, and we get one Donna who gives like a humanish answer, and one Donna who gives an ostentatiously like wrong and alien answer, but it turns out that's the real Donna, and we've left the real Donna behind. So we can get like the double up of okay, we need the TARDIS to tell us that this is the fake Donna and get rid of her so we can save the real Donna. And that fake out is kind of done to kind of get the viewer emotionally invested, like, oh my god, is real Donna gonna die? But I think afterwards, like when I kind of feel like if you're going to have something that huge happen, for one thing, I need like to know why the fuck did real Donna give the obvious fake answer? That's so weird. Like I need like more than just a glib explanation of like, oh well, the fake had copied her so well. But also I just feel like I need more than 2 seconds of them hugging afterwards, because it's just like it feels like there's a thing there. Like even as we have two characters who are much older and wiser, again, just because of the nature of the adventures they're on, the things happening between them are still so like, oh my god, like what the fuck? it's so intense. And also they haven't seen each other in so many years as well. So I just feel like there's always an opportunity to be more interesting and more like a bit more intense. I mean, even like it just feels like part of the DNA of these kind of stories where you can actually do that, even just going as far back as Hartnell, right? It's not that the characters have to bite at each other, but rather I want them to get real with each other, like more real almost. Like in the final scene at the end, where the situation is resolved and Donna is gently asking the Doctor about what is actually going on with him. Even that little scene, it feels almost like Donna's so passive there a little bit, and it kind of annoys me because like the Doctor's doing his usual thing of just not telling her much, and she's just kind of like nodding understandingly. It looks like, I'm sad, Donna nods. Doctor, I'm sad, Donna nods. It's like it's all starting to feel a bit one-sided almost. Like we're going back to that old thing of like in the classic 10 era of like the Doctor's pain is so central to the narrative that the companions kind of exist to sympathize with the Doctor and the Doctor's pain, rather than it being a truly two-way kind of active, kind of like a really constantly evolving relationship. And that kind of bugs me a little bit, just purely because if you have two leads in a show like this, like you can do so much with both of them. You don't need to just weight it towards one. You can kind of like, in the way that this episode does with giving the Doctor the big flux outburst and Donna kind of not really getting that like, as much as Donna has big emotional stakes in the scenes where she's about to blow up, she's not getting she's not getting scorched to the core of her soul here by the story. And so again, it's always going to feel like a bit of a missed opportunity for me for not doing stuff with both of the leads. Because again, it just makes me miss 12 and Clara and the stuff that would go on between them. Like, I can't really picture RTD ever writing a Kill the Moon style bust up between the Doctor and the companion, because I feel like that's
what I was thinking of. Yeah,
it feels like that's not actually part of RTD's vision for what Doctor Who even is. It just feels like it just seems
he'd be so good at it.
It's slightly anathema. Yeah.
He's so good at that sort of writing, though. I just wish he could.
He would.
I don't think Donna's a bad mum, but I think that would be so rich to explore. Well, you knew full well that the TARDIS might screw up when you entered that. You knew full well you might get a little Big Finish gap for adventures as soon as you stepped into the TARDIS. What's the deal there? Like, you knew you might not be back soon. You know you can't always get back on the right day. I just feel like that would be such an interesting vein to mine there. And I feel like Journey's End, we resolved very cleanly. Like, we resolved it too much in the Star Beast, actually. We resolved it a couple of times. But I feel like I'm not asking for an 8th Doctor and Charlie type thing, but am I actually? I mean, that could have been interesting to resolve. Hey, why did you just, like, why did you just, like, could you have at least asked, are you chill with me doing this? Like, you mind wipe me with no, you mind wipe we Ada Lovelace style. Like, there's just so many little ruptures between Donna and the Doctor. I, like, felt like you've got it's a two-hander episode and you're on a big spaceship walking around. There's so many things I would have loved them to talk about with each other, even if it was the doppelgangers. And it just kind of stands out when Donna gets less stuff to, like, talk about in this episode compared to the Doctor. It just kind of annoys me because I'm like, there's so many things that could have happened. But I know that's kind of a non-criticism to be like, but this could have happened, but this could have happened. But it held the episode back from being like an all-time classic of this vein that people mention like Midnight to me, because I just felt like it left a lot of character work on the table that would have been so juicy to sink some vampiric teeth into.
I do think it's not purely hypothetical, it's a matter of balance almost, because in that scene, the duplicates are really important, because with the Doctor and fake Donna, we do get this two-way thing where it's because Donna is, like, seemingly so open and so moved by the Doctor's pain that the Doctor like is willing to actually falls for it and opens up to her, right? There's that mutual thing. So that is there, and that is happening with the Doctor. And it's just like, it's not really happening with Donna and fake Doctor at all. Nothing like that is happening there. You know, it's just very kind of glib, and fake Doctor is just kind of standing there, not saying anything. You know, so again, so it's a sense of like there is an imbalance there. Like the episode is clearly willing to do stuff here and not willing to do the same in other areas. So it feels inconsistent, I think, is the issue. So it's not purely a hypothetical. It's a case of the elements not entirely being like fully aligned.
I hate to say this again because it makes me sound like I'm saying, oh, it's too early to judge. But I do think there's a possibility that if we're looking at Dr. Donna conflict, everything's been so like you said, gig harmonious between the Doctor and Donna. That I think there is a possibility that we're to expect some kind of conflict in the giggle. I know that there's a theory that the toy maker taunts Donna with previous companions, and that there's various stuff going on with the toy maker. So I think there is a possibility of that. So I don't want to say it's too early to judge, because it's not, because there could have been stuff like that in this episode. If there is in the giggle, we shall see. I would understand why this episode is not the one.
I would say with this kind of episode throughout Doctor Who, which you get a lot, I think it's one of those things that Doctor Who is so good at doing, because it's so focused on dialogue and just having two characters alone in a desolate environment, just a set, very little stuff going on, and just using the actors stuck in that space to actually just go through all of these ideas and do really great dialogue with great actors. And I feel like a setup like this is for having great dialogue. And it's almost like, in a way that maybe a giant action-packed fucking unit toy maker shootout is maybe not. So I feel like this kind of episode is really where that sort of stuff kind of belongs. It's like it's home. And I think it's like it's a thing. And you know, as much as we're kind of like complaining, yeah, I love that this kind of episode exists and kind of happens, and that we get it, because I think the choice to do a concept-heavy two-hander like this, it's the kind of premise that I think the Doctor Who and New Who specifically could always use so much more of.
Yeah.
Because the actors are really the show's biggest strength, I think, in a lot of ways. Because, I mean, if you get good actors, you can do fucking anything with them. Doesn't matter how shit the rest looks and how shit the sets look. Doesn't matter how shit the effects look. Even the scripts can be kind of weak if the actors can carry them. And just having a format like Doctor Who, which is so focused on just having this bond between these leads, just gives you like so much room you can do for what you can do with the actors. And this kind of premise slots so well into Who's remit, because you can do it with like no money. I mean, a story like this, which is about nothingness in some ways, which has the characters talking about nothingness, the edge of the universe, concepts that only exist within language, and is doing so much with language. It's just such a boon to be able to do that, and it slots so well into Who's remix. You can do it with no money, and that's the thing. So I love that DNA of Doctor Who kind of is still here in the story like this, and it's so good. I mean, it's such a fundamentally enjoyable thing to watch when the two characters are just discovering this big puzzle that's mapped around them, that they're just kind of immersed in this really desolate atmosphere, like stuff like that. I really enjoy all of that. So like, again, it's not a sense of like I'm kind of bothered by the general premise of it, because I think the premise of it is really cool.
These episodes are why so many people love Doctor Who.
Absolutely.
And that's a great thing. Doctor Who's great at these episodes. Yeah, 100%. Even just, it's like, it's almost functional in a way. Like we're at the spooky spot in space, and let's be ambiguous about what happened here, and there's a bit of a mystery, and there's creatures that we can do. We don't have to spend much money on effects, but we can make them really creepy just by ambiguous dialogue and stuff. Like, it's sort of bread and butter Doctor Who in some ways, but it just works so well. It's not only RTD who's good at this. So many Doctor Who writers in classic and new and everything else are good at this. It just works great. The salt thing, that's just, I love the kind of science fantasy mixing up supernatural with science fiction. Doctor Who's great at this. I love that. I loved how we just kind of non-fussily move on to vampires after the salt thing with the teeth. I just think that's great. And then how, I'm assuming it's a Maker of Toys suggestion at the end there, where he's like, I invoked a, superstition at the edge of the universe where the walls are thin. Who knows what could happen now? Like, I'll be salty if that wasn't connected to the Maker of Toys. Because actually, no, I would prefer it was disconnected. But I think it is connected. Anyway, all that stuff, I just think Doctor Who's just so great at that. Russell's so good at that. The show is so good at this. We're in spooky spot in space and blah, 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 blah. I
think it is worth appreciating the tricks this plays, which are actually quite respectable and clever in their own ways. So like, and maybe not all that common. So for one thing, the way in which part of the mechanic of this story, particularly towards the climax, is that as the Doctor works out the puzzle, so does the bad guy. So essentially solving the puzzle helps the baddies win. And what that means is that it moves the plot forward at the same rate as it's being explained to us. I think that's kind of a clever trick in terms of getting a story that moves just through dialogue. I mean, because essentially the climax of this episode is just a really long scene between the four characters as the Doctor basically just works out and explains the plot to us. But because the trick there with the duplicates are understanding the plot at the same rate as the Doctor, and the Doctor is kind of stuck in the scene where he actually is trying to stop himself from figuring it out, but he can't stop himself because his brain is so addicted to figuring out figuring out puzzles like this. That kind of gives you, it's just a great mechanic for having stuff for the actors to do, obviously, but also a way to move the story along and exposit in a really clever way. So a little trick like that is really clever as well. And also there's another one, which is kind of there's a reason that the shapeshifters are like being so terroristic and like scary and threatening to the main characters, which is that by using fear, they can enhance their own like shape shifting. So they are the more scared the Doctor and Donna are, the better the imitation will be, because the faster their bodies are working. So little details like that are bits of cleverness from RTD. I think he has good like kind of original ideas that are slotted in.
The idea of a monster scared to make you think quicker so that it can copy you faster is such a Moffat thing. The fact that the Doctor can't not think. The Doctor is already think.
Don't even think.
He can't stop himself from thinking because he's so, like you say, like you put it, is addicted to solving puzzles. That's such a Stephen Moffat thing, and I think it's really nice to watch Russell T Davies write Doctor Who, the post-Moffat Doctor Who state of the show. It's really exciting because we're seeing all of these kind of heaven-sent rehashes and Blink and Vashtanarada and all of these things that RTD openly loved about Moffat's Doctor Who after Rusty Davies left. It's exciting to see RTD do those types of things. It's like he just couldn't wait to use the skills that he learned from watching Moffat Doctor Who. It took him to his second script to use the Moffat techniques that he picked up, just the second script, and it will happen more and more and more as the series, the Russell Davies series progresses.
Yeah, we can only hope. I mean, another little clever thing, like in the story, that the fact that the reason the captain's plan works is that the monsters don't understand it because it's slowed down. The thing about that, as much as it feels maybe a little bit, you could accuse it of being like an ass pull, like why don't they understand slow things? But the thing is, all that is just a reiteration of how the episode is working on the viewer, because throughout the episode, I mean, the story is showing us that the countdown and the robot walking, but because it is slowed down, we don't understand what it is either. So essentially, the monsters are fooled by the plan for the same reason that the viewer is, ultimately. Because I think if you played it, like, if you sped it up, and we just had the words going like, Fenslaw, Collis, Brait, and the robot was just constantly walking, it would be more clear what kind of thing is happening. Maybe we couldn't work out that it's a bomb and there's a countdown or whatever, but I think you could see that there'd be more of a sense of momentum. But because it's slowed down, because the pieces of it are separated from each other rather than existing in a clear continuity, that makes it more opaque to us as viewers for the same reason it makes it opaque to the monsters again. So I just think a little clever bit of a clever idea there, like it's in there. So I think RTD deserves some credit for these things.
If it's good, it's Moffat's idea. If it's bad, it's Russell's idea.
It's fun seeing people who normally like RTD kind of hate this episode because it feels like Moffat. That's really fun to me. Like, there's some like Moffat DNA that just fundamentally turns people off, even if it's not Moffat writing. This kind of puzzle episode is just anathema to some people.
On Instagram, Russell posted, and Moffat commented on this, Russell posted an earlier version of the script where he kind of Doctor Who nerds out. When the Doctor and Donna are at the edge and they're like, oh, I've never been this far out, Donna. Of course, Russell's fan brain couldn't let him write that in the first draft or whatever draft this was. And so he's got, in the Instagram comments, he's talking about Quinnis with the first Doctor and Planet of Evil with Tom Baker and Tech Dayun with 13. And so he's got a much more kind of chewy line about what Donna asks, have you ever been this far before? And 14 says, oh, I've straddled multiverses, but only inside magnificent time ships. To stand here like this, which is just awful, right? So I'm really glad he cut that. But I like that RTD's very aware of his own bad instincts at times now. It was like he was saying in the behind the scenes when he was doubting himself and thinking about putting Hartnell in there or, you know, some wacky stuff in there, and that he stayed true to his good ideas. I like that you're seeing here as well. His fan brain makes him go, oh, but wait, the Doctor has been here before. I need to acknowledge it. But then he thinks better and he goes, no, I need to not do that. Anyway, Moffat's comment on that was just, I have notes. Draft 3, that's from, Russell says there. But he says the Doctor was still thinking it, even if he didn't say it.
Forgive the fan brain and indulge, please, for a moment. We're talking about Moffat stuff. I wonder whether, you know, mavity is a simple gag, and it's used several times to a fault, maybe in the episode. But, you know, we're talking about Rusty Davies and we're talking about Doctor Who and we're talking about, you know, his Doctor Who in a post-Moffat world. Mavity in itself is a gag, but the concept of changing history is more a serious matter in the show. And, RTD established that, and Moffat played with it brilliantly. RTD's been playing fast and loose so far with bootstrap paradoxes and history being rewritten, history being unwritten, and even real world changing and evolving and arguably censoring of content. I can't help but think that all of this will eventually resolve itself in an in-universe, larger, kind of more meta-narrative way. The Doctor's apparent blasé attitude for a larger thematic idea about meddling with time.
I think the impression I get is that a sense of instability is something RTD really wants to work in, like, to just the reality of the show, period. Because, like, at the end, when the Doctor talks about what I invoked as superstition, now it could become real. Like, the line between fantasy, reality, history, imaginary is, like, becoming, it's, like, so permeable at this point. And it's almost like that RTD wants that to be, like, the character of the show. So something like mavity could happen, and it could just be also just kind of hand waved off. Like, it's funny, but also that kind of thing can be constantly happening. And, like, the Doctor will notice, but Donna doesn't, because the Doctor's a Time Lord. He can notice these little things, but he's not, like, massively moved by them, just because things are so up in the air. And I think he wants to. I think what that does is it widens the room for play. I think, just in terms of how much the show can play with things. And I think just totally throwing off any kind of shackles is something that will probably benefit RTD in terms of how much he can do, and, like, how much just sort of wacky shit can happen in the show. And also, and if you want to build it into a whole existential crisis about how, the web of time is disintegrating, you can do that. But also, you don't necessarily have to, because you could also go, well, this is just how things are. Like, in Moffat's mini-sode, I think Good Night, when the Doctor is talking to Amy about how Amy's memories don't kind of fit together. Like, the thesis of that is that, well, this is just the reality in Doctor Who as we conceive of it. Things are just messy, things are chaotic, memory is chaotic, thus, so is time in our universe. So it could just be something like that, where reality is just so fundamentally unstable, and that is something to be embraced rather than feared.
Yeah.
They can believe two completely different things at exactly the same time.
I love that. That's a wonderfully human thing. What do we think of the non-human thing? The lizard. Oh, RTD wanted the podcast, the Juno Dawson podcast, to name it. They ran through a few names. But what do we think of that captain? Actually, the thing there, the captain's gender. What's the story there?
Donna says, I think Donna unthinkingly says he, and then corrects herself to potentially she, and then corrects herself to potentially they. And the Doctor very certainly corrects to she, having analysed her skeleton.
Yeah, I feel like what RT was going for there is some kind of, like, oh, well, the Doctor just knows these things. Like, the Doctor has a deep connection with blah, 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 and then the peoples of the universe and blah, blah, blah. I think that it does have awkward resonances, like, gendering is a skeleton or whatever. Or I suppose if you want to cope it out, you could go, well, it's from the spacesuit. It's a feminine spacesuit in alien-ese, in alien terms, which, again, is just very random. I think, it's kind of the things where I think you can see, I guess, the intent, the idea that the Doctor can, like, recognise. The Doctor doesn't. Actually, it is odd, isn't it? Because the Doctor is literally, he is assuming, but it's presented in a way where it's presented authoritatively, almost. So it's like, well, the Doctor knows these things, right? So it's not a case of a gender bias, but rather the Doctor has perception. Also, then you have the fact it's a skeleton. It's really awkward.
It's quite funny, isn't it? What we're accidentally seeing through RTD's writing is that the Doctor is like a clumsy trans ally. That's kind of the impression that we're getting now from the 14th Doctor, a clumsy trans ally who doesn't really think about pronouns and goes, oh right, yeah, sorry, yeah, I should be thinking about that when somebody corrects him, and accidentally identifies gender by skeleton. And these quite absurd things, despite actually being an ally of trans people. It's an interesting accident. We've now had this baked in as a character trait, especially given that we've only got these 3 episodes with this character. So a lasting memory of him will be that he accidentally misidentified or over-identified gender by analysing a skeleton and misgendering creatures from outer space.
It's like, in terms of why the captain is ultimately gendered in the first place, I think the script wants to like humanize or personalize the captain, which is harder to do if you're kind of being ambiguous, like in terms of the language you're using. I think because that's tricky. But I think like it's like, but because then retroactively like engineering from that, we need to go, well, you know, let's have a bit where Donna kind of hedges, and then the Doctor like specifies that ultimately you're then bringing in the discourse about gendering the character. So it's almost like you're bringing the problem to yourself, which doesn't even necessarily need to be there. Like you could just go like, I mean, yeah, you could hand wave it as like, well, you know, the females of this species have the protruding blah. But again, it's just not necessary.
I do want to talk about the captain in more of a sense of script. I think that the idea that she took her own life so they couldn't work out what she'd done is ingenious. It's a very clever, simple mystery answer. I only wish that the mystery had been introduced earlier in the episode rather than all big expository dialogue scene. I understand that that's what had been clanging on the ship to set up that, the dread of the clanging every so often and what that might be. But as great as the scene might be, the big expository scene might be, and it is brilliant. I think it would have been nice not to have had it all in one big go, 10 minutes before the conclusion. That's a minor, formalistic gripe, though. It works. It's a great scene for various reasons. But had I been a script editor, I might have suggested the captain came much earlier in the script than she did, because I think it is a little bit on rewatch. It is a little bit lame that it all happens in the same one scene moments before the big bomb scene.
I do like when they first hear the numbers being counted down. One of the Doctor's first assumptions is that it's a countdown. He lists 4 ideas. I like that's kind of smart writing that respects the audience. Like, it's kind of over-egging the misdirection if he thinks of 4 things and they're all wrong. It feels much more doctory to me that he thinks of 4 ideas and one of them was the correct idea. And I like that the clanging makes sense of the captain at the end, but I agree with you that it's not really a effective mystery in the sense that it is all just kind of compressed to the ending. Yeah,
I think there are the structural quibbles you can have with the script are many. I think you can, particularly as it gets towards the end, totally there is this bottom heavy sense that we're packing everything into this final big dialogue, and then that leads to this final little chase scene, which feels kind of obligatory in a lot of ways, because on one hand, the Doctor's premise is we need to speed up the countdown from the control room so it will blow up and they'll kill the monsters. So then why do they leave the control room and start running after the monsters? I think it's fundamentally very fucking difficult to get good material out of. They run after the monsters for a bit and then they give up because they can't run fast enough. So, that whole bit where they're just running along and we get these really dodgy, shots of them, Tennant running after Tennant and clearly on the treadmill, those bits. I think narratively, there's a bit of redundancy to them, almost, because it's nothing is really being achieved by them running after the monsters here. I get why it's there. I get why you need, kind of the TARDIS in the big corridor, why you want, Donna punching herself. The appeal of all of that is very obvious. And, structurally, in terms of the logistical reasons for it being there, I get it. But in terms of how it actually works, it just feels like a messy climax to the episode.
Yeah. It's a shame because the time thing is so smart and clever, like you both complimented. We need to think slowly, but of course the Doctor can't think slowly. That's really cool stuff. It just kind of functionally how the plot ends there is a bit weird. And then the Donna thing is, I think it's so lame that he picks the wrong Donna and then they just get over it. I just think that's cheap. It's a shame because there's a lot that's really tight in the episode.
Donna begging the Doctor not to leave her there was amazing. I mean, we all know that Catherine Tate's a brilliant actress. We've seen time and time and time again that she's excellent, but God, she so is, isn't she? And I think that just Donna begging the Doctor not to leave her is amazing. It feels like a cyclical end to the beginning of her time with the Doctor when she's shouting down the TARDIS until the Doctor comes back. Twice at the end of The Runaway Bride. I think that's lovely. And
it's such a huge dark beat, I think, to put there. It's really significant. So again, I do not just take it back to complaining, but it's such a huge it's such a huge thing. I think almost feel I wanted a really more damning and cutting lead in and lead out of that, because it's such a huge thing.
I think it's worth taking a moment to appreciate Murray Gold there.
Always.
He does such a beautiful variation of Donna's theme in that scene. and it's wonderful. And it's slow and kind of mournful rather than dramatic and climactic. It's slow and mournful. It's beautiful.
Yeah, totally. Like as they're doing this fake out of his Donna about to blow up and die. Like I love the really perverse, strangely beautiful atmosphere that happens there. She's watching it in slow motion far away.
Yeah.
And we get like reverb and kind of hear like her voice in the speakers and just kind of like echoing. Like there's a really cool. The atmosphere of that's really cool.
It was nice to evoke Last Christmas as well.
That was so weird. Not in a bad way. I was rewatching a Murray Gold interview recently because in the Starbeast podcast, I say that Murray isn't precious about, like, sometimes it's let the best music win, even if it doesn't make all the sense in the world. And and the source for that is an interview where he basically just says that.
Nobody ever asked for there to be character themes. It just seemed, as Series 1 was developing, there was a little tune for the Doctor, and then by episode 2 there was a little tune that seemed to be about Rose, and then it seemed like if those two characters were going to have themes, it seemed a shame to leave everybody else out. It does sometimes create a problem when I've run out of music and I need to use, and this piece of music fits exactly in a place but it's not that character. I'm like, oh God, will anyone notice? Yes, they will. Of course they will. Well, how can I suggest that they're connected? And then I cheat.
And then he says it keeps you on your toes that fans know your music so well and fans are so smart. Fans will always immediately go, well, that's from Last Christmas. You know, I remember that perfectly. So sometimes you need to kind of... Gig, I think, was doing this for I'm the Doctor in the Starbeast. Sometimes you need to kind of creatively arrive at something that makes sense of the music being reprised. And I think Murray can do that and fans can do that. It's funny because we love his leitmotifs so much because it's so cool how he varies them and where he uses them. When he uses them, I don't want to say wrongly, when he uses them very, very creatively, I think there's only a few times where it clangs so hard where it feels like you can't really rationalize the linkage there. Twice Upon a Time clanged hard for me there, where it just felt like we were going through a greatest hits section of his music and it didn't correspond for me well at all. But here, I can kind of see the Last Christmas link. Can you talk to that, Tyler? Can you think of why they use the Last Christmas music there?
I think there's a thematic link between the two episodes. I think that they're both traumatic adventures featuring dreamy surrealism, calling into question the companion's safety and whether they might want to stay. And the decision for them to stay finally, and their trauma bonding with the Doctor. I think that's what they share. I
do think the first impulse is probably Murray thinking, I've got this great bit of music that would fit perfectly here. Let's stick it in. And then, what's the linkage here as well? Now I've just...
Yeah, why would that? Yeah.
But that's good. Like we both having fun doing that right now. I'm sure Murray had fun doing that. That's not a negative thing at all. It's like most of the time you can kind of come up with a reason that makes sense, and then everyone enjoys doing that. There's the few times he can't, I assume he probably goes, okay, I can't actually use that. And it's probably pretty rare that it gets used anyway.
Yeah. Wasn't that Years and Years-esque music at the end amazing? I really hope for more of that.
Yeah.
It really makes sense for RTD and Murray to flex their apocalypse horror muscles in this story, and given that they've been honing in Years and Years.
The ending. So Wilf being back, I didn't expect him this episode. Like I expected him back. It was very overwhelming to me. I didn't even really feel emotionally touched in the moment because I just felt like so bowled over by that's actually Wilf and he's actually back. And the actors, very sadly passed away. It was a lot for me to take in. I had a more normal reaction on the second watch. On the first one, I was just kind of bowled over a little bit by it.
Yeah.
It's beautiful to see him back. In the Unleashed episode, RTD does say they had more for him to do.
It's one of the great joys of my life that at the end of Bernard's career, at the end of his life, he came back to us to shoot what actually turned out to be his final scene. We didn't know that at the time, but he loved coming back. He had kind of retired, but he loved Doctor Who. He came to our read-through. He was there. We all went out for dinner. We had such a happy time. He was shooting in Camden. We wanted to do more because we love him. He wasn't well enough to do more, but that one scene he completed fills me with absolute joy. In those few seconds, there's everything he brings to the screen. He's joyous. He's worried. He's scared. He's full of love. He hugs Donna. He hugs the Doctor. It's pure Bernard. I am so glad we got to shoot that because it's one of the great joys of my entire life that I got to work with that man and I got to know him and got to be his friend. I love him. He's absolutely beautiful. And here he is at the end back in Doctor Who.
It was great to have him back and to have what I love, he came back and they touched him. He wasn't just like a distance thing. He was actually there in Camden and they touched his wheelchair and they touched him and he was gesticulating so much and he was clear. I think that works, really well as it hit a lot of great beats and it's nice that it was lovely to get him back and it's nice we avoided a kind of Star Wars scenario of, okay, they shot a scene and it doesn't make any sense as a final scene. It's nice that it's nice in the sense that I'm not like thinking in a mercenary way of, well, the plot therefore works because, the scene he shot was perfect. It's just nice that he's such a beloved actor and character. You want him to have a send-off that just feels uncomplicatedly like a good send-off, and this does feel like a good send-off. So that was really nice. Gig, what did you think of all that?
I will say the scene itself, the dialogue feels a bit like it was written on a napkin because you get a really awkward expositional line where Donna's got her memory back without dying, which I recommend. And it feels weird because if days have or however long has passed since Starbeast, I think Wilf might probably have been informed by now that Donna got all her memories back and didn't die and all that shit happened. So again, it's a bit awkward. But again, I think it's just a constraint of the circumstances they were in and having to work with someone who was kind of at such risk. And I think I completely respect it and I get it. It's not like a massive bugbear I have there. It's cool that he's there. It's really cool, really nice little scene. I love that, again, there's hugging, and there's love, it's intimacy, it's physically there. And the way it's also positioned as kind of the Doctor's just been having this really sad kind of angst in. And again, it's a beloved member of Donna's family, one of the nobles who the Doctor has so much love for, who kind of brings him out of that. I think, again, that is feeding into what RTD's doing, overall with the specials, the idea that the nobles are somewhere, a safe refuge for the Doctor, almost like an opportunity for the Doctor to actually say hello instead of goodbye. So I think we'll see how that wraps up, but yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
I think it was beautiful, wasn't it? It was not sickly sweet and so much of a tribute as you might have expected. It's exactly the final scene that you could ask for as a veteran actor and a veteran Doctor Who star, to and to be at the heart of the 60th anniversary specials, leading a cliffhanger into the big finale, and he gets real work to do. He's not just saying, "Hello, Doctor, I'm Wilf, and I enjoyed."
Yeah, it's an actual scene.
Knowing you, Doctor Who. It's a real scene in which he plays real emotions and then plays fear at the end because of all the big dramatic Doctor Who stuff that's going on around him. So it's nice. It's nice that he really got to act and they really got to have a nice real scene with Bernard Cribbins as opposed to what I was expecting was a tribute send-off. It's quite fitting that for such a good actor, for such a veteran actor, to have a real final scene which slots perfectly into the cliffhanger and the resolution.
Yeah, it is deeply true both to RTD Who and to Cribbins' history with it that the scene involves a plane crashing out of the sky and a giant explosion and the end of the world. Because, that's just perfect, isn't it? You want the scene to be fun, and that's what it is.
There's something not well executed I just want to bring up, because We mentioned Unleashed, talking about, Bernard, all the nice things he had to say and everyone loving him. Unleashed, I'm going to do this every episode of RTD2 probably. It's just going to become a thing. The host, Stephen Powell, some people, I think some of us on the podcast and some of our friends, and I've seen some people we don't know mention the same thing as well. The issue, a lot of these kind of behind the scenes shows will have someone from the actual show as kind of the host. Like, it might be an actor who's not one of the main actors, but they're like around. Or it might be that there's not really a host at all. Like Confidential just kind of ticked on with, there was a voiceover and then we just kind of moved around the different talking heads and the different things. Unleashed is a host, but they're separate from, they're not to do with making Doctor Who. Stephen Powell's he's a media personality. He's hosted lots of shows, all sorts of interesting things he's done. So it makes some of the banter just have a different flavor than it would when it's like Russell and Tennant and whoever bantering with themselves or with other people that's making the show. In the Destination Skaro Unleashed, there were times when everyone's kind of bantering and the host is there.
Hovering.
And hovering basically. And it's just slightly noticeable that there's a kind of fringes element to it. Anyway, so that and in Star Beast as well, Unleashed had some of that as well. So when he's there, sometimes it's like, and especially in this very well-oiled RTD and Tennant and Tate, everyone knows each other so well that everyone's bantering and they kind of host themselves, don't they? But what happened that was really curious in this Wild Blue Yonder Unleashed behind the scenes episode was we had this section where the host wasn't there. It was Tate and Tennant bantering with each other, which is great. They're so good at that. But what the Unleashed episode did was it kept cutting back to Stephen Powell in the TARDIS set, like reacting on his own to the camera. So like Tennant and Tate would like say a bantery comment and then, filmed much later is like Stephen Powell making a face in the TARDIS, just like to the camera. And this is just getting edited in to the scene of Tate and Tennant bantering. Like it's like one of those Marvel reshoots that like happens a year later after the rest of the filming and we're just like cutting between. That was just very strange. Gig, did you watch The Unleashed? Do you know the bit I'm talking about? It really stuck out to me.
Yeah, I know exactly which bit you're talking about. Like, I did watch most of Unleashed this week. I skipped the Stefan's work experience segment, which I'm going to do forever from now on, but I did watch that bit. And it's impressive how fast Unleashed has progressed into self-parody.
That's the word, yeah.
Because that bit of editing you describe really does feel like self-pastiche of just the already awkward orthogonal relationship the host has to the cast. Like, just like editing him into places where he does not exist. It's just so awkward to watch. It's just so, oh my god, it was really getting insufferable. Like, I think I hope it gets better before it gets worse, to be honest, because damn.
Something I did love in Unleashed though was there was a lot about the verisimilitude of the episode. You had the production designer getting excited about a ship being like water cooled because that's kind of a new idea, and that he liked designing all the watery stuff and the filaments and all that.
The script description of the flight deck is there's water bubbling through the set, there's water bubbling through the cockpit. It was the most exciting thing about it because I've done quite a few cockpits, but I'd never had to incorporate water into it.
And something Tyler, you'll love this, I don't know if you've seen it or not, but that the language on the ship was designed around how like horse hooves would like be able to scratch out words like in the dirt because, the skeleton looks like a horse.
Oh, amazing.
Our graphic designer, Stephen, comes up with all sorts of different languages and hieroglyphs, and together we kind of try to fathom out what the alien language might be. So in this case, our pilot is sort of equine, horse-like, and we thought what it would be like, if they had hooves, how would they have communicated and their language might have developed. So maybe they sort of scratched with their hoof, and maybe they clopped with their hoof. And so these shapes are derived from scrapes and kind of maybe once upon a time in the equivalent Sanskrit for the horse aliens. That's where it came from.
That's a meeting I want to be in for. That is a meeting I want to be in. Right, this morning I've cleared out everybody's diary. What today is with hieroglyphs for a horse's hoof.
Isn't that? It's something you
Wow, what a wonderful fact.
You just kind of pick up that, that looks like a kind of real language when you're just watching the actual episode. But I just love that there's so much actual thought behind it. It's just you can feel a soul of a show, I think, just subliminally by things like that. What a cool idea.
And I think stuff like that is again motivated by the strength of the story behind it. Because I think when you give such a strong idea to like a production team, like a crew, they're going to want to like do the utmost and make it feel as real as it can. And it's because RTD, just with a suggestion of this story with this captain and the ship, like, there is so much kind of embedded in there. You can just explode it out into all this amazing design work, like with the robot and the language and the screens and displays in the ship. Like, I mean, it's just an absolute feast, I think.
This is kind of disconnected, but earlier we mentioned that dialogue about the outcrop that the TARDIS would be on, where the Doctor is saying to fake Donna, it's funny because I wonder where the TARDIS goes at random. Maybe it lands on some outcrop by the sea and there's a tribe and they worship it for 100 years and they grow up and try to burn it. Then they get wise, they preserve it. Then they build a city all around it till the TARDIS is just a tiny little dot surrounded by skyscrapers and monorails. Time passes and the city falls. It all gets swept away and there's the TARDIS still on its outcrop by the sea. She's the only thing I got left. And then they talk about Gallifrey. Do you think that's just lyrical, interesting dialogue that's kind of talking about the Doctor's characterization? Do you think that's making a specific parallel? And that dialogue felt so naturalistic to me. I've seen some people online be like befuddled by it. So I'm just kind of second guessing myself. Do you think that was like a really specific parallel? Because I've seen a lot of people equate it with the Timeless Child, and am I the crazy one here? I don't actually understand what they mean.
I think it's burning up some time, having the Doctor talking kind of to himself, kind of to Donna, and it's using this beautiful fan theory about the TARDIS, which I don't know when this was dreamt up, but this is something that the kind of idea I've seen floating around the Doctor Who fandom for years and years and years, and I think many people have had variations on this idea. It works particularly well in that we're reminded that the TARDIS is a time machine and won't necessarily be gone for the same length of time that the Doctor experiences it. It could have gone away for 1 million years or more or less. I'd like to think that this is a headcanon that RTD has about the origins of Gallifrey and the Gallifreyan Citadel, because that's what it immediately evoked to me. And then Murray Gold seemed to like that idea too, because instantly after that he uses this gentle piece of This Is Gallifrey, Our Childhood, Our Home, the Series 3 and Series 4, and the Specials soundtrack piece, which I guess is all of that is quite a nice reminder of the Doctor's connection to Gallifrey.
In fairness, they do start talking about Gallifrey directly, like after that in the scene. So I think that you could kind of say that's the alternative explanation for why kind of the music does Gallifrey there. But I think also like the speech itself about kind of the TARDIS and the city, and the fact that that could theoretically happen between any adventure. Like any time the TARDIS goes off, that could be a whole story, a whole like millennia legacy there, just in between episodes or just in a random, even in this episode, that could be happening. I think something like that. What it really conveys, I think, to me is this sense of, well, two things. One, the loneliness, I think, of the TARDIS existing as just this constant. And two, again, that sense of constancy, like permanence. So this idea, and I think if you want to like talk about parallels, you could maybe draw parallels to like the Doctor's existence, not as the timeless child, but just generally as being this being who is kind of immortal, who like people pass by, who is kind of like almost like this fixture in the universe, even as everything else moves on and kind of leaves him behind, and kind of leads this perhaps almost voluntarily lonely existence, kind of solitary existence, even as he brings companions with him. He's always kind of alone in some dimension, and the TARDIS is like that to the nth degree. So I think the fact that he talks about she's the only thing I've got left, again, he's linking that loneliness almost of the TARDIS to his own loneliness. So I think there's the emotional tone of it is kind of speaking to like what he's feeling and who he is as well, as much as it is about like the literal a fascinating idiosyncrasy about what it means to have a time machine that just goes off by itself and just like situates itself like within the landscape. Again, it is kind of also about like his own emotional landscape.
Can you explain it to me like I'm 5? Like I still don't understand the timeless child. What's that got to do with the TARDIS being by the sea and the city gets made and the city falls? I feel like I'm not trying to make a joke. Like I actually don't understand.
Well, the thing is that the timeless child ideas are so vague. People make up vague like parallels with them. Well, I don't get this. Well, I guess it must be timeless child. I think all it is, right, is because the timeless child is found alone in this landscape, and there's a real no one knows who they are, why they're there. So hence, and the Doctor talks about like a landscape and some city or something or other. So just that sense of like loneliness and desolation, just existing almost like as this wandering entity, like alone. I think that is the parallel with the timeless child, if one exists, and that is why people are like in the replies of certain like high-profile Twitter accounts, people are bringing it up like, oh, I didn't get this speech. Maybe it was about the timeless child. That's why that's happening. I think not because of anything really specific or thematic in the dialogue.
I feel like there's something mildly anti-intellectual actually about. I know like it sounds insane to say that about people like trying to make a metaphor out of something, but I feel like that's a very like base thing to be like thing is other thing. Like it's just the Doctor's speech is just a reference to the series 12 finale feels like a much lesser thing to me than the Doctor's speeches illustrating the sense of loneliness he feels, in his life, or the sense of constancy he feels from the TARDIS, the sense of lack of permanence he gets between people because, the TARDIS remains the same and everything else gets swept away and relationships change. That's a bigger idea than just a comparative metaphor, right? So it feels kind of like a self-own to be like, did you really not understand that? That was clearly just a metaphor for the timeless child. I know I'm getting pretty big on my britches when I didn't understand that metaphor at all, like 5 minutes ago, but that feels smaller to me than what you guys were kind of illustrating.
Russell T Davies fans, Doctor Who fans, maybe in general, definitely in general, do this kind of thing where everything's either always backward looking or forward looking. It's always either to do with the lore or it's to do with foreshadowing a future story arc thing. And nothing can ever seem to stand on its own two legs as a piece of poetic drama or idea in its own right. I think that's a problem that a lot of people have with Stephen Moffat, who is in many ways a poet.
I think
you're 100% right to say it is anti-intellectual, because I think it is. I mean, on one hand, the show kind of maybe trains people to behave like that in a way, because it does do a lot of arc teases and backward-looking things. But I think it is ultimately kind of anti-intellectual, because I think people feel safer with kind of flattening things down into this is a lore reference, than actually having to engage, their own imagination, their own poetic faculties to try and interpret how this could just be theme, this could just be meaning, this could just be the idea in its own right, rather than something we can conveniently connect to another text.
I think I get it now, though. Like, they were... Well, okay. So the idea is the TARDIS is the Doctor, is the timeless child, where it goes at random, like the timeless child ended up at random at the portal. Outcrop by the Sea doesn't relate to that. I know Jodie dies on like an Outcrop by the Sea, but that doesn't really connect to anything. Worship for 100 years, that doesn't really happen to a timeless child. They grow up and try to burn it. Tecteon's pretty rough in handling the Doctor at first, but that's not really trying to kill them. I mean, it is trying to kill them, but not, get rid of them. Then they get wise, they preserve it. Yeah, Tecteon does that. Then they build a city all around it until the TARDIS is a tiny little dot.
They built themselves a citadel.
Yeah, well, that's the timeless. That's a bit that actually does connect. They build a civilization out of the timeless child's powers until the timeless child is a bit forgotten in all the pomp of the city and everything. Time passes and the city falls. That happens plenty in Doctor Who. That Gallifrey dies, and there's the TARDIS / the Doctor still on its Outcrop by the Sea. Like now I squint, I can see what they're saying, but it's just like a little sandwich in the middle that actually you can equate directly. The rest of it doesn't actually work. And
again, it's so much smaller than the wider thematic idea to just make it about this one specific thing that happened, when it could be like all this whole range, this whole spectrum of things that happens like continually and is kind of happening in the Doctor's like emotional life.
A little bit of dialogue I loved that came like right after that was Donna just mentioning she didn't eat last night because of the Star Beast happening. Just a lovely little humanizing element.
Yeah, the tuna madras went uneaten, tragically. I mean, that's the extra lore about the Star Beast that we were really lacking.
It also helps prevent more adventures getting jammed in to the start of the episode when the TARDIS is going haywire. Because there can't be too many hours.
Yes. Good point.
If there's going to be a gap, it has to be...
After this.
There's no real spot for a gap yet. Yeah.
You'll have to see how the giggle goes. Then maybe there'll be a gap implied by that, but certainly not here.
It's possible we don't need a gap. We're talking backwards and forwards. There are ways to generate new stories that don't require a gap. Because you can't put a whole fresh day in there while the TARDIS is zipping around, because then she would have gotten hungrier. I hope she eats in the giggle.
Yeah, and she's not going to get to eat now, is she? With the chaos in Camden.
Yeah, it's the chaos in Camden.
So on the topic of poetic things in the episode, so kind of vaguely related to the last thing, what do you think about the motif of the actual song Wild Blue Yonder, from which the episode gets its title? The fact that that's playing in the TARDIS at the start and then it's playing again at the end when the TARDIS comes back. Like, what do you think? Because it's very specifically identified as a war song, and that's something that makes kind of Wilf. I think Donna talks about how Wilf was uncomfortable with that, like when she was being taught the song at school. So, what do you think the role of that is in the episode? This kind of deceptively jaunty song of war.
I think the creatures, the not things, are obsessed with war, aren't they? They say they're shaped by war and blood, fury, and I think. Wilf in the anecdote, in Donna's anecdote about Wild Blue Yonder at school, Wilf is the example of Donna's belief that people are more than that, the universe, and that they have it wrong. I think the the fact that the TARDIS played it to them at all is, I guess it's like a sci-fi idea, isn't it? That the TARDIS is communicating with them in the same way that it's communicating with them that there's hostile action, that there's danger afoot. I think that's essentially what that's doing, isn't it? It's alerting them that there are warmongering beings around.
I like the song is like it sounds beautiful, and like Mrs. Bean says, it's jolly. I think it hooks in the episode. Like we're saying, the no things. They kind of drill down that you guys talk about, love letters and whatever, but come on, the stuff that actually gets broadcast out of your universe, the actual thing that happens, the actual communication we get is just endless conflict and heat. And I like the Wild Blue Yonder song. It like sounds nice, like in both senses. Like the lyrics sound nice and the song sounds nice, but it's just about killing. It's just about war and about death and conflict. So I like it's kind of this. You can flatten all human endeavor into just brutality and conflict. I think is kind of the idea I took from it, because that's what the no things take from the universe, and that's what they reflect back onto our characters. So it's like this song sounds like it's about other things, but you can just boil it down and it's just about conflict and death and killing.
I think it is also maybe serving as almost an implicit exhortation to violence. Like,
yeah,
that sounds weird, but I think because the TARDIS has kind of brought them there in its own way to try and get these fucking abominations killed. What the Doctor does, he speeds up the countdown. He makes sure these things blow up, these things die. That's when they have to be destroyed. So it's almost like the TARDIS is kind of like saying, okay, I'm sorry guys, but you have to go to war here. You've got to stop these fucking creatures. And as much as the creatures are informed by war, nonetheless, because they exist, they have to be fought against. They have to be stopped, or they will spread, destruction and chaos. So it's kind of that this pragmatic sense of, well, we have to. It's telling you, I'm sorry, but there's this line I think in series 3 in one of those, I think Daleks in Manhattan 2-parter, where the Doctor says to Martha, "I'm sorry, Martha, but you got to fight," and it feels almost like the TARDIS is saying that to the Doctor and Donna in playing that song.
I wonder whether there's a read here about there's a political read here about fascism.
Wow.
And about the idea of fascism staring you right in the face, and it can only be destroyed. It can only be fought, despite the fact that it's a thing made of hate and fury and blood and war. Then it needs to be fought with hate and war.
So the line that Donna doppelganger has, which is love letters don't travel very far, which I will say that's a good line by itself. I say Catherine Tate makes it an amazing line, just the way she says it, gorgeously delivered. I think again there's another lovely bit of poetry from RTD in the script there. I think
the actual phrase "Wild Blue Yonder" and the actual phrase "the edge of the universe" or "at the edge of the universe," which is in the episode and is the title of the episode. Well, I mean, it's the translation of the title of the episode in some other languages. They're really pretty phrases and they sound like a beautiful and exploratory thing when it sounds beautiful, but as we see in the actual text, whether it's Wild Blue Yonder song or Wild Blue Yonder episode, they're actually it's a hostile war sort of situation, sort of place. I think that's another connection. The edge of the universe sounds like a really lyrical thing, and it's actually a very horrifying place because of these entities. Wild Blue Yonder sounds like a beautiful phrase for the sky, but the song is actually about, the military in the sky. It's, going down in flame, death in the sky. So I think that's another link.
And again, the entities at the edge of the universe, they are bad because that violence has infected them from within the main universe. I think there's a parallel there as well, in the sense that the frontier of violence that perhaps, say, the US military is flying out to go confront, that is kind of a violence that they are spreading in many examples, in many instances, in kind of expanding their ambitions across the world, getting that oil, doing all that shit. It is kind of a sense of, and it's a thing with imperial violence in general. Like, this is a violence that you are spreading in your attempt to conquer other territories. So you are kind of infecting them. Like, as much as you kind of talk up, these horrible enemies are fighting us, like, they're fighting you because you're kind of spreading out and kind of attacking them. So it's kind of, again, that violence is kind of infecting outwards and kind of spreading and creating these enemies and these forces, blah, blah, blah. So that's another parallel with how, I guess, the edge of the universe and the Wild Blue Yonder are kind of the same thing.
Speaking of RTD poetry, I love that line, "We drifted here in the lack of light, passing no time." Lack of light and no time being hyphenated concepts. It's like the RTD type of poetic cosmic horror that you'd get in things like Jaws of the Nightmare Child or The Could Have Been King, something of Meanwhile and Never Was. I've missed that kind of thing from Russell T Davies.
I mean, huge example of that. I believe in the subtitles for the episode, the creatures are referred to as not things, because Fake Tenant says, "We are not things," as like it's one word, not things. And if that's the official monster name for these that goes on the website or whatever, then that's great, because that's a great name. The not things, so good.
I like those Dutch angles when it first started getting, started getting colder when they were in the underneath bits. Just some nice visual storytelling.
That detail that the mass has to come from somewhere, do you think was that a coded jab at Kill the Moon, do you think? With the exploding dragon. I think actually the role of that is that it allows the condensing breath whenever the character kind of breathes. You can see that it's cold visually. That's kind of a horror detail because it means like the monster's coming.
Yeah,
it's kind of a clever trick. As much as it sounds like a nerdy thing, it is serving a role. So again, it's a script that is being quite thoughtful in a lot of dimensions, even if it isn't in some other places.
What did you guys think of Mrs. Bean?
Well, that was confusing to me. To me, Mrs. Bean is funny because it makes me think of Mr. Bean.
But what's funny about Mr. Bean? Why is it funny that he's called Mr. Bean?
Good point.
I think there is something about maybe the word bean or the concept of a bean. It's like it's this round thing. It's this like kind of object. It's like the
concept of a bean.
Concept of beans. What a concept. I mean, yeah, I don't know. There is something fundamentally that feels absurd about even just the word like a bean. Like, oh, you bean. Oh, I beaned him on the head. Here's a beanie bag. There's something fundamentally jaunty about it. This is such a ridiculous thing I'm saying right now. I can't even hear myself.
No, you're right, because BEEN isn't funny at all. It just feels like time. Like it's just a connective word. There's nothing funny about that. But BEAN, there is a smack of humor to it. It's not overthinking it. You're totally right. One of them is not funny at all, and the other is a little tiny bit funny.
And it just is. It just is funny, isn't it?
Again, which is why it's so weird that Donna the real Donna comes up with like the weird attempt to logic out why it's so far it's funny. It felt very out of character for her, honestly, so I didn't get that.
It felt in character, but years ago. It felt in character in like maybe The Runaway Bride or something. God, it was so insane of RTD, wasn't it, to have a big plane crash in central London. That's so insane. I can guarantee you he's not going to deal with the fallout of that. We all know, unfortunately.
I mean, if the Star Beast's any indication, maybe he'll just unwrite it. Have it unhappen. Like the roads.
Yeah, maybe.
It just goes back in the sky.
Planes have stopped.
The giggle is, like, for a few months now, it's looked like the best one of the three to me. I know this always looked like the Kino character-based one, but I love bringing the toy maker back. I love how they actually did that in this episode. It makes like absolutely no sense at all. But this idea of we said like a vampire-y supernatural thing near the edge of the universe and salt and the toy maker is, a different universe, collapsed universe because he's been beaten. But did we let him in by invoking this supernatural? That if that's what's going on, I just like it doesn't make sense, but it feels right to me, that kind of idea. There's just something about that mixture of science, fantasy, supernatural nonsense. It kind of clicks in with the old Toymaker serial for me. This will sound absolutely ridiculous if this isn't what Davis is doing. I might sound like a complete moron by the time the giggle is aired, but that's the impression I got from it.
Regardless of whether you're right, it's so nice, isn't it, that there are now conceptual theories and real ideas and or a creative direction of like cosmic horror or just something. There's some kind of conceptualizing being done with these things. It's nice to finally have Doctor Who that is saying something about something and coming up with things. And even if that's just left flat, which I don't think it will, but I think even where it left within this episode ambiguous, the Doctor invoked superstition at the edge of the universe, and what could that possibly create, and why was he so scared that might have caused some damage, and we will never know. It's just nice. It's nice to have Doctor Who saying and thinking things. I
mean this really seriously, because the fact I feel it makes me feel confused. I'm excited for an RTD finale, for the giggle. Are you guys excited for an RTD finale?
Yes, I think he's going to stick the landing.
Yeah, I'm excited for it. I don't know about the sticking the landing bit, but I think it's going to be very exciting. I think it's just going to have so much going on. I feel there might be like multiple end of times going off at once, but the ideas here are already like so much. I feel like we're already working with really strong ideas here, really strong characters here. Like I already like 14 more than 10. Like I love what's going on with Donna and stuff, and I just feel like it's not foolproof, but there is just a lot of ways this can go right. And I feel like even if it goes wrong, it's probably going to be really entertaining.
It's not because of the function of this as a miniseries, and because we're so quickly moving into the next era, it doesn't need to be like a big, like series 4 finale kind of mechanical attempt at grabbing view, because the whole function of the miniseries already is that, and we're moving on into the next era right away anyway. It's not a huge, it doesn't need to be a huge send-off for the actors, because this is what all this kind of was anyway, and these actors have already left before, and we're moving right into the next. I feel like basically it's inoculated itself against a lot of things that tend to make RTD finales messy. It looks so insane, but it looks so camp in a way that a lot of the RTD finales aren't as much. Like
yeah, I don't know about
that. I don't know if I like how silly it looks. I like Neil Patrick Harris is a very weird man, but what I've seen in the trailers, I just absolutely love this extremely camp, silly, ridiculous take on a 60s villain. I love how much he's hamming it up. I think this is just going to be such an interesting contrast from this quite serious episode and the Star Beast, which was really hooking into the past and, more of an emotional family sort of episode. I have a really good feeling about this. I think it's going to be utter chaos in Camden. I think RTD is going to be throwing a ton of ideas at high speed. I don't usually feel good about his finales or a lot of Who finales in general, but I just have a really good feeling. I'm happy to be proved. Well, I'm very well maybe proven extremely wrong, but it's nice that it's nice to feel positive about it.
My big concern is that I worry that we might be retconning the previous 2 episodes, maybe even some series 4 stuff in the giggle, and I think that would be unfortunate. But maybe we won't. I don't know. We will see.
How do you see that happening? Like retconning how? Like why retcon series 4?
I worry that the toy maker might have something to do with the bringing of the Doctor and Donna together, because we're still talking about that as though even in Wild Blue Yonder, we're still talking about destiny bringing us together, and why did this face come back? We're still talking about all the purpose that we need to fix on, and we haven't done it yet. And I worry that we're going to get some big, grand explanations for things.
Oh, that's what you mean.
No.
Okay.
No.
Yeah, I worry that might be coming. Yeah.
I mean, in fairness, like in terms of like, what brought the Doctor and Donna together? I mean, it's either Dalek Khan, or if it's Dalek Khan versus the Toymaker, like I don't really care either way. But again, I'm not. I feel like that might not actually be what it is so much, because I feel that might be something else. Anyway, point that aside. I think, Neo, I know you withdrew it immediately, but I think your point about camp, I think you actually have something, you might be onto something there. Because if you look at RTD's finales, you've got, grim Dalek battle, Daleks and Cybermen fucking killing each other, the Master just decimates the world with the Toclafane, these horrible creatures, Daleks again, and then the Master kind of converting everyone. And the Master is probably the most camp of those, because he dances around and does all this silly shit. But the Toymaker is fundamentally different, because he's a reality bender, isn't he? He's all about games, and actually a conscious sense of play, rather than this, any, real, investment in the idea of killing people, or, cruelty, cruelty certainly, but not so much violence as just chaos. Right, so that's what this is, and that is the sense of fun is baked into the premise here.
I know we all 3 of us defend that these specials don't need to be doing fan wank. I mean, the Starbase kind of was anyway. It's just fan wank that only kind of wanks to people who read the 1980 comic, which and they matter. These people matter. But I do like that we have one of these episodes which is doing the kind of classic Doctor Who thing of let's bring back a villain from the 1960s and let's do let's take that seriously and do a sequel to that. I wouldn't have wanted that for all 3 episodes, but it is fun to get it once. Like, when we complain about fan wanky Doctor anniversary expectations, it's not that we hate that idea. It's just that we hate the idea of doing that all the time. We like the day of the Doctor. And
we're putting that 60s villain and the 80s comic villain in front of David Tennant and Catherine Tate, who left Doctor Who in 2009. And I don't understand why that's seen as not being fan servicey, because it is, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's a good thing, but I feel like I wonder whether it comes from a sense of entitlement that maybe that they weren't so long ago and they wanted to come back and whatever. But if we were doing this with, as we're reasonably good because the actors are still alive and we've just done it in Tales of the TARDIS, if we were doing it with 6 and Perry instead of 10 and Donna, 14 and Donna, that would be equally fan servicey as what this is. So I don't really see that there's any kind of issue with the 60th anniversary specials not doing anything fan servicey, because
they are.
They all of them literally are. All of them literally It's David Tennant and Catherine Tate with Russell T Davies, and this is old Doctor Who coming back for anniversary specials.
I do think one of the strangest things that gets said a lot about these specials is that it's only celebrating Series 4. It's only celebrating RTD. It's just a celebration of 2008. It's not a celebration of Doctor Who. And that is such bullshit. Even just the moment you look at the fucking toy maker coming back and just all the... And even this episode, which has no specific fan-made things in it, but it's nonetheless so indebted to like years and years and decades of past Who, like in so many different ways and little ways. Like, I mean, it just feels ridiculous. I mean, and even the ways in which this new Doctor, played by Tennant, is consciously being informed by stuff outside of RTD Who, stuff that's happened since RTD Who. So it's fundamentally that it's so illogical and irrational. I think this is an accusation that it's just RTD wanking himself off and not actually like wanking off Doctor Who as a general concept or a general history. Because again, it just comes back to this weird idea that Doctor Who fans have about what it means to celebrate stuff, in the sense of, well, if you bring back the iconography, then you're celebrating it. And actually, no, because things have substance as well as iconography. Like there's content too to celebrate.
I think it's also really cool for anniversaries to play around with what's a different way we can mark an anniversary. It's one of the reasons I like Zagreus, the 40th anniversary audio drama, a lot, is because it kind of for Big Finish of all places, it's so easy to just say, let's bring the actors back and we give people what they want. They say the requisite lines at each other. To kind of go in another direction and say, we have all these actors we can use, but is there something different we can do with that? Like, if we have 4 Doctor actors, we don't need them to all be playing their Doctors with each other. Can we do something else interesting with these actors? It's kind of what this episode does with Tennant and Tate, is say, we have these amazing actors. Can we do something different with them to, kind of show off their acting? Which is what Zagreus did with Colin, Davison and McCoy, saying we've got, these great actors everyone loves and everyone wants to hear their voices. We've all heard them do the Doctor a lot. Wouldn't it be interesting to have them play other characters? We still have McGann as, well, he's not playing the Doctor actually for a lot of that story. But the fun of it is these actors, everyone likes the actors for the Doctor. And if we're tuning into an anniversary, well, we want to see those actors, but that doesn't mean the actors need to play their own characters necessarily. It's not what David Tennant's doing, because he's playing a slightly different Doctor, and in this he's playing, a doppelganger. Zagreus was, the Doctor actors are playing different characters. I like that we know what fans want, which is to see the actors again, but I like playing around with, but can we do this in a more creative way than just having them play the same Doctors and, interacting and, you redecorated. In the 70th or 75th anniversary, wouldn't it be cool if we get another idea? Like we've had, the audios have done, we have the actors playing completely different parts, and that's fun. And, this is done, what if we have a short little mini-series of the same actors, but the Doctor is a slightly different Doctor, and we go through kind of an abbreviated Doctor Who series of the types of stories they're doing. Wouldn't it be cool if like the 70th or the 75th comes up with a different idea again for how an anniversary can work, where it has some recognizable element of maybe we're bringing back an actor or we're bringing back something, but we're not necessarily doing the 3 Doctors, the Day of the Doctor kind of thing. We're doing some other idea that's still satisfying and still celebrating the show, but in a creative way. Because the best way to celebrate the show is to make the show good. And one of the best ways to make the show good is to innovate the show. So I really like this playing around with what an anniversary can be. And
I would really love if playing around with the anniversaries freed up just everything in general. Because, we talk about bringing Doctors back and getting crossovers between that. And locking that into an anniversary ritual thing really actually clamps down what you can even do with it. Like, suppose one day a really good storyline actually came up, which involved, I don't know, let's get Paul McGann back for several episodes in the middle of like series fucking 20 or whatever. Like, that again, if that could be good, then why not do it? Why limit that to an anniversary thing? So I love the idea that the traditional anniversary ideas could be broken up and spread out to like elsewhere in the show, whereas the anniversaries can be about new and strange things. Like, we might as well mix it up, like let it be interesting.
It's also nice to keep some pleasures unhad. Like, you could have had Matt Smith in the 60th in some sense. Even with Russell, I'm sure there's something you could have done, but the fact we didn't do it means that joy is preserved for later. I'm sure eventually Matt will be an anniversary again. The fact we didn't do it now means we haven't wasted it, and that joy still awaits all of us, which I think is actually really, really important. You don't want to... I think the reason the comics and Big Finish's version of multi-Doctor stuff started wearing thin on a lot of people is just because it happens all the time. We're always getting those Doctors together. The comics were always putting the 10th Doctor with someone else. Not bringing Matt back is actually a sign of respect in some ways, in that we're not jamming Matt into the Tennant specials, and we're not just bringing him back for the sake of bringing him back. I imagine when Matt is eventually brought back, and I'm sure he will eventually come back, because, he's not against doing the character again, like Capaldi is, and he's very, very beloved. When he eventually comes back, we'll have the novelty of, hey, Matt's back. Maybe in a Matt-centric story, or who knows. I feel like it's still, by not just doing it offhandedly or just doing it to do it, you're actually preserving the joy for later. And I think we've seen in real time the last decade or two with the extended universe how the other way can go, and it does rob a lot of the joy out of it. So I think it's not a bad thing to keep some joys not being had right now, because it just means we're going to get that joy eventually, surely, but just later.
Russell is actually respecting Jodie Whittaker by not circling back to the Durdledore regeneration.
Yeah.
I think it's respecting Jodie by not bringing her back. It will be too soon. The same way as you couldn't bring Tennant back until 2013. Imagine Series 5 or Series 6, that would be insane. Jodie, I've seen some people say she should have been at the 60th. A very minority opinion. But I think that would not be good for her or for the character. You need to miss someone to bring them back. She needs to be gone for a while for there to be oh my God, she's back. Right now it'll be oh, she's back. You need to miss something to enjoy having it being brought back.
To be fair, in 13's case, I do feel like what people really want there when they say that they want 13's back in the 60th, it's almost like they're conceding a dissatisfaction with how her actual era went. I think there is a lot of unspoken dissatisfaction there. So this desire to, RTD, bring her back, please fix her, do something right, give her a good episode. It's almost that desire. It's almost like they were missing her before she even left because her own era was so emotionally desolate. But that's not really the point. I think what you're really getting at is that it's important not to cheapen things. And the Big Finish approach cheapens these ideas and these comebacks quite a lot, just by how much they do them. And and I'm not necessarily I'm not married to the idea that Matt will absolutely come back one day, but the value of it is preserved and it hasn't been tossed off. So it's something that still has potential value if it is ever done.
The idea of let's bring Matt back and maybe Capaldi back as the doppelgangers turn into them, that's so shit. That's what we're bringing Matt for.
It's rubbish.
Is to be is to be a bit of body horror as an accessory of a David Tennant episode. That's not respecting Matt. That's not respecting Matt Verhans, in my opinion. That's just a little bit of continuity wank. I adore Matt Smith in the 11th Doctor. That wouldn't make me happy. I'd be that's a weird thing to do. Did Matt actually film that? Or is that a CGI thing? The respect is to give them what they deserve, and what Matt would deserve is a big showing, not a weird body horror thing. That's a very weird impulse.
There is one more thing I have to say about the episode with regards to the TARDIS. I think the TARDIS is used in multiple really interesting creative ways this episode, and I think RTD is really good. He's always been really good at that. We stick the sonic screwdriver inside of the keyhole. We see the light blink on when it's mending itself, like an iPhone or something. That's quite interesting. We see an eject lever, and the new wheelchair-friendly TARDIS set lifts itself up so that somebody can be ejected from the doors. That's quite cute. We see it descending downwards as it returns from the Doctor. We see him scooter it with his foot to fly it. I think that's beautiful. That reminds me a lot, actually, of the Runaway Bride again. When we see the Doctor, using a piece of string to fly it while he's off doing something else. So all of these things are quite interesting to use a traditional Doctor Who set piece with quite ingrained ways of using the TARDIS and changing those up and thinking how can we use the TARDIS in a different way to how it's usually used. I think Russell T Davies is very good at that.
I love using the TARDIS to get rid of the sonic screwdriver for a story. It was very savvily done. Just to stick it in there and they're both gone at the same time. That was brilliant. And I love that the story proceeds completely fine even without the sonic anyway. I love, with the TARDIS, I love stories where the TARDIS kind of has a cryptic message that is ultimately resolved. It turns out the TARDIS was giving us a message. I mean, because that's the edge of destruction again, right? That's what's happening there. And I love stories where that kind of non-verbal language of the TARDIS is kind of part of the puzzle and part of the machine is trying in its own strange way to help out and make sense of things. And it's just part of the funny little language that the show has. It's just it's an enjoyable type of story.
I think we expected maybe. Oh, I don't know whether we expected. That's the wrong turn of phrase. I think there was some expectation, some theory that Wild Blue Yonder would be to do with the TARDIS in some capacity, and I think I was surprised in that it kind of was in not the ways I expected, and I do think that the title Wild Blue Yonder and all of these things could be read either not as about the TARDIS and about the not things and about various other things, but also it kind of does. It kind of does link back to the TARDIS in some ways, and it is about the uses of the TARDIS and the communications of the TARDIS and the ways that this new TARDIS works for the Doctor, and the TARDIS projectile vomiting, a big explosion and fire. All of these things would have really excited me as a kid to watch the TARDIS doing interesting new things, and I think that's something that was at the top of RTD's mind. I don't think all of these things are kind of functionally more interesting in a script, but I do think that there are lots of things being said about the TARDIS in this episode, and I think that the TARDIS is the Wild Blue Yonder in exactly the same way as Wild Blue Yonder is about the song which pertains to the not things.
Lovely to talk about a good episode. Isn't that nice?
Yeah, that was great. Yeah, really nice to do.
Now, we're picking up a few days after we recorded that main section of our discussion on Wild Blue Yonder, because on the 7th of December 2023, two things happened. The novelisation for the episode came out, so I read that, and so Gig has not read it, but we'll have a little discussion about the novelisation. And also, Doctor Who magazine 598 came out, which has a few little things pertaining to Wild Blue Yonder. Maybe most interestingly is a comic which takes place in between the Star Beast and Wild Blue Yonder. What do you think of that, Gig?
I think, considering how it seemed like RTD was almost trying to avoid like a preponderance of super gaps between these episodes, I mean, it's kind of... I'm both surprised and unsurprised that they've managed to fit something in there already, although it's just a small comic.
I'll describe the comic to you first. So it's 4 pages, but they're not all together. They're scattered throughout the Doctor Who magazine as you read it. So it's very, very...
Oh, that's different.
Slight. The first one, so it starts with 14 and Donna. They're in the TARDIS. The TARDIS is on fire. It's going through the time vortex. They end up in the early 20th century, and you know the Red Baron, like German pilot?
Yeah.
Red Baron's shooting at a British plane, and then the TARDIS careens in the middle of it, and chaos. And then a liberation of the Daleks type thing happens where these aliens come and they're trying to scoop up the Red Baron, and they're squid aliens that try to scoop up talented pilots for blah, 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 blah. But the Doctor gets away. And so that's the first quarter of the comic.
Right.
Any reaction?
Well, I suppose... I don't know, really. I mean, I was just wondering if there's going to be some sort of, like, through line to any of these, because, like, you mentioned a pilot there, and the episode features a song about the Air Force. I don't know.
One of the squid aliens was on the TARDIS when they got away from the Red Baron, so he continues on.
Okay.
Then the next page, which comes later in the magazine, it starts with the wild ride continues, the console's really hot, and then we cut to the Royal Geographical Society, 1878, and it's an explorer like convention, and there's talk about this tribe that have been unchanged for hundreds of millennia, and so we cut to like this tribe that are dueling with dinosaur bones and whatnot, and crazy things happen to this tribe, and so we're like flashing into this tribe, and we see the TARDIS warped with squid on the ceiling to this tribe. And so Donna like comes out and looks at the tribe people who are all like bashing each other, and Donna's like, yeah, what's going on? And they have a little interaction, 14 and Donna, with the tribe people, and the explorer's talking about, isn't it incredible, this tribe I came across because I had this huge totem with red hair, and the totem was like Donna, that the tribe has remembered always. And then they talk about megafauna that were also near the tribe, like a huge turtle. And then everyone's like, oh, you're making all this up. But he's like, no, it's true. There really was a totem with red hair. And that's that bit.
So 14 and Donna just walk out of the TARDIS to interact with these people?
Donna comes out. Yeah, and 14 comes out as well.
That seems odd, given the TARDIS is supposed to be like exploding during this whole thing.
It's still red. Like we can see it's red on the inside, even when they step out.
Yeah, so they're not worried about it. Well, I suppose if they've been worried about it fucking off, then the Wild Blue Yonder wouldn't have happened, would it? So that's not a very valid complaint, is it?
The next one... the TARDIS is still on fire, and it's like going through time. Donna steps out, and it's this huge pitched battle, and 14 like asks, where are we? And Donna says, basically in Game of Thrones, if you see Jon Snow, scream.
Hilarious.
14 says, those aren't Starks and Targaryens, they're Normans and Saxons. This is Hastings 1066. And so, big epic battle going on. Donna gets saved by Harold, son of Godwin, Earl of Essex, rightful heir to the English crown. And then arrows are flying around and 14's tackling around. saving him. The squid's still visible on top of the TARDIS ceiling. At this point, Donna gets complimented. TARDIS warps off. Donna then goes on a smartphone while the TARDIS is still on fire, saying, "History's fine. The internet says the eye thing might be rubbish. Harold could be the next guy along the tapestry getting run over by a horse." 14 asks, "What about the missing panels?" And we cut to one of the missing panels from the tapestries, of course, the TARDIS. And then we cut to looking around, and the squid that was on the ceiling before is now on Donna's head.
Right. So it's turning into a veritable mini season in the space of these 2 episodes.
The last page of the comic, so big squid on Donna's head, it's a bit Resolution-esque, is going time ship, pilot, bzz, will surrender, bzz, neural pathways, bzz. And Donna's saying, "I'm not the pilot, you squid idiot." And 14's saying, "She's human and this ship isn't, and neither am I." The squid talks to 14. The squid latches on to 14. 14 and Donna walk out of the TARDIS.
Again.
And they're on to a theatrical stage show of the importance of being... it's not a stage show of the importance of being earnest. It's with these 2 men are talking by a stage curtain, and they're saying to each other, "This play what I have written is called The Importance of Being Ernie." And the man asks Donna, "Are you Miss Glenda Jackson? If not, kindly vacate the stage. Professional performers only. This isn't the generation game, you know." Meanwhile, 14's wrestling with the squid. The TARDIS is on fire. The TARDIS is now in the sky, and it's snowy. They're above London. Snow, snow, snow. London, December 1970-something. There's a nativity scene below with Neris. And I think it's young Donna is like in the nativity like act, and young Donna says, "Oh, Neris, stop blubbing, you're going to drop Jesus." And then the TARDIS has basically made a star in the sky, and that's the story.
Wait, so do we see Neris in that little flashback?
This one's really hard to explain. I'll show you.
Oh, it's like a double page, like horizontal. I was wondering how so much a story could be fit in one page.
How would you describe what's going on in this one? This is a bit trickier to...
Just a random 2-panel cameo from...
Ernie Wise was an English comedian.
Right, so the squid thing is basically just resolved by the TARDIS is on fire, so fuck off, and it just fucks off, goes bzz, abandon TARDIS, bzz.
Yeah.
But it's a brainless machine. It won't feel a thing when its anti-crash self-destruct kicks in. Wait, what's he talking about? Oh, he's talking about the squid?
I think the squid.
Right. Gosh, I didn't realise the squid was... Okay, I should have been obvious the squid's robotic, isn't it? It doesn't look very organic. What the heck?
So the robo squid exploding is like the nativity star, which is very festive.
Oh, okay, that's very RTD Christmas special
Yeah.
as well, isn't it? Right, okay. Alan Barnes' story, okay. Right. Yeah, okay. Well, chaos.
I guess it's a proof of concept that you have a little Big Finish gap between Star Beast and Wild Blue Yonder. After all, it just can't be too long lest Donna get hungry and that screw up a line in Wild Blue Yonder. But they jammed a couple of adventures in there. Some big ones, actually. The only other... What do you think of comics like this? Just a bit of fun? A bit weird? Or do they actually irritate you?
They're just like distractions like interspersed in Doctor Who magazine, aren't they? I think it'd be a bit churlish to be like, seriously bothered by them. Especially something like this that isn't even really having much of a premise to it. Like, I mean, in terms of evaluating its individual entertainment value, I mean, well, there's not like an enormous amount to say, really. Yeah, I mean, it's just a strip, like, whatever.
Yeah. Then there was this magazine had lots of stuff in it, but mostly about season 1, the shooty season 1, and a bit about the giggle. But the stuff in there about Yonder that I wanted to bring up was just 2 things, really. One, at the start of the behind-the-scenes bit on Yonder, David Tennant says, "Russell always talked about wanting to do a 2-hander, so we knew it was probably coming, but until you get the script, you don't really know what's in his head. There was this and another script which didn't materialize, which is still in his head." Catherine Tate says, "And we won't say what the other one is." And David says, "Just in case he does sit down and write it one day." I can't tell if they mean there was another 2-hander idea or 2-hander script that he developed they didn't use, or if there was just another script in general they were considering using for the miniseries.
It just sounds like it's probably like another idea that RTD was talking about. Because, I mean, it's very in character for RTD to have ideas that hang around a long time before he actually writes them. So, I mean, I doubt it was like another full-on two-hander script, at least at this stage, but it might have been something he's mulling over and maybe we'll use for Shooty and Millie in ensuing years, maybe. Who knows?
The other little interesting thing in here is it's coming off the episode's kind of double-think stuff. It talks about, how humans can have two contradictory thoughts in their head at the same time. Russell says, I was told that by a drama teacher at youth theatre in Swansea when I was about 11 years old. He was quoting some science fiction book that said human beings can think two completely opposite things at the same time, and I loved that. Look, here I am 50 years later. I still remember that. So that's interesting. I don't think it's 1984 he's talking about when he says some science fiction book, but that's, I think, where a lot of people get that idea explicated. The two contradictory ideas same time.
Yeah, cool. It's nice to, I guess it's nice to hear that he's kind of incorporating things that he's sort of had in his head for a really long time, like since literal childhood.
Yeah.
I think stuff that sticks out to you a lot like that it kind of stays with you through your life. It's, it's the kind of thing that's so personal that you're going to end up writing something interesting if you eventually engage with it.
The other little behind the scenes thing, this is from the director who says he pitched ITD some of his own ideas for the episode. He says, giant crawling versions of the Doctor and Donna, that was my idea. Grabbing onto the cart and stopping it moving, Donna bashing the hands and then them bashing the cart. We talked about that scene for 2 or 3 months. I think on screen it's probably only a minute and a half, but it's a very long scene on paper. So that's cool because that's a really interesting bit of the episode.
Yeah, I mean, totally. I mean, earlier on in the discussion we were talking about like the role of a director and how much the director for this episode had to actually like do. Like in terms of when you're thinking about like how good a job they did. And I think I mentioned that sequence, like so much of a chase like that is going to have to be in the hands of the people making the episode. And that pretty much proves it. Like the director like came up with basically all the big ideas of that sequence. Because I mean, I suppose if you're writing the script, you're just going to be like, okay, some shit happens here, put it in, and then you're actually realizing that, storyboarding it out, goes to the role of the crew. And yeah, he did a great job. I love that. That might be my favorite bit of the episode, honestly. I think every time I watch that big chase sequence, I'm just thrilled. It's just really funny, crazy, fucked up looking. It's really got great kinetic energy to it as well. I particularly love when the giant like fucked up Donna kind of smashes the cart and it goes spinning out of control. It all just looks very like the word isn't convincing. It's just it looks fun. It's like a roller coaster.
Yeah. Onto the actual novelisation then. So that was written by Mark Morris, who's done a bunch of British horror type stuff and a few other Doctor Who things. I think with Doctor Who novelisations, this is kind of off the top of my head, but I think there's kind of 3 types. There's those that really lean into the novel format and try and kind of push the episode into a new thing, basically. The Day of the Doctor is like a big example of it outright changes the climax of the story to fit the novel format more, but there's lots that do that in subtler ways as well. But there's the ones where the writer is massaging the episode into a novel, basically. Then there's the ones where it's not just kind of putting the script into prose, but it's not going so far as to fully change the format. It's kind of a middle ground. I think the Star Beast was kind of that. That didn't just feel like Gary Russell adding, dialogue tags to the script, but it didn't feel like he was trying to transform it into a novel exactly. You know what I mean? It was kind of a middle thing. I think lots of novelizations of that.
Yeah, I think a lot of the like well-remembered ones and kind of beloved ones are kind of like that as well. Like even the Remembrance of the Daleks one, which is very talked up for how it introduces lore stuff. I think that is kind of in that middle zone where a lot of it is kind of a like just robust play-by-play of the episode, but like in between you get additions and stuff as well. So it is thinking about stuff, but it's not like radically different in structure or style.
Then Wild Blue Yonder is the third category, which is the play-by-play of the script. Adding dialogue tags, but basically it's the script as a book. There's nothing like, how the Star Beast had those extra texts, like the text messages and a few little format things like that. There's nothing like that here. There's no like new scenes really. It's pretty much the script with.
I mean, is there anything in the way of like character stuff like Star Beast had for Sylvia and maybe 14 and Donna a little bit?
There's nothing new. Like it does expand a little bit on some things in the episode, but there's no like new thing like the way we got with Donna's mum. Yeah. But this, I'll run through the bits worth talking about. But basically, this is the script novelized rather than the script turned into a novel, if that makes sense. That's my read of it anyway. The prologue's called Apple. It's from Isaac Newton's perspective. And it has this big description of the apple tree and how Isaac feels under it. And it's very like lyrical. The air was full of birdsong and a pair of red admirals skidded erratically by. Really was the most glorious day. Any other young man in such bucolic surroundings, particularly one who had been up half the night working, might have allowed himself the luxury of a summer doze, but not Isaac. And that's Isaac's so smart and he thinks of lots of things. Apple fell on his head. Isaac starts getting the idea for gravity. It's that sort of description. The Isaac interaction goes the exact same as the episode, really. That's how that works.
But before we move on to like the real chapter and kind of just moving on from that prologue, I think what's I just wonder, because the tone of the prologue in the actual episode, because it is so, I guess, short and fast and sharp, it's kind of like the frothiness and kind of absurdity of it kind of almost washes past as it goes so quickly. I mean, it's like a sort of a punch to the face, I guess, like a slap. Whereas I just wonder if like actually expanding on it that much in prose into a whole full-on prose prologue, I wonder if that essentially makes it serve almost a different role in the novel, not intentionally, but like sort of maybe even to its detriment. I wonder, does it feel like more drawn out than it does in the episode?
Yeah, I'll read you a bit more. This is the vibe of it. An apple bounced off his head. Ruefully, Isaac rubbed the sore spot on his skull, but as he looked at the offending piece of fruit on the ground beside him, he felt a rising sense of epiphany. He reached out and picked up the apple. Of course, Isaac breathed. New and ever more exciting ideas forming in his mind, he gripped the apple harder and stared at the branches above him. But before he could transfer his thoughts from brain to parchment, the peace of the day was shattered by a monstrous cacophony of noise, like the bellowing screech of 1,000 crazed harpies. It's all kind of in that tone.
Okay, I can see what they're trying to do. There's an effort to make it well written, or like sound well written, I guess.
And a bit twee.
Yeah.
It's fine. Then all the actual chapters are named after the numbers in the episode.
Oh, okay.
But they don't correspond to when the numbers are said in the episode, because of course that would be really difficult.
Yeah, understandable. Yeah.
But you get that weird thing though of like, you have like chapter 8 and in like chapter 6 they'll say 8. It's not really a big deal, but it's a kind of mixed match between that idea.
Oh, so are the chapter numbers counting up or down?
It starts with Fenn's Law, so 10, 9, 8, 7, 6.
Okay, so it's counting down. Okay, all right, that's fine.
And 1's just called 1, of course.
Right.
Fenn's Law opens with, the TARDIS was on fire. It careered through the time vortex like a cat with a burning tail, flames spiraling around its outer shell, its roof light, a fierce white torch trailing energy. The sound of its ancient engines was like the screaming of a soul in unbelievable pain. It flickered in and out of existence, seeking egress from the vortex, seeking somewhere to settle, to recover, or perhaps to die.
Quite atmospheric. And that's not in the episode. Like, the episode just starts with it landing, doesn't it?
No. A new line in there is 14 saying, if you drop a cup of tea into the controls, it's completely fine. So
that tracks. It is kind of in love with Britishness.
The next chapter, Collis. Here's a Donna bit. Donna's mind whirled. For years, her memories of traveling with the Doctor had been denied her, but now she had them back, and suddenly she recalled an adventure they had shared a long, long time ago in a vast library on a distant planet. But you can whistle, she exclaimed. You can snap your fingers. You can summon it. Just use that stupid head of yours and get it back.
Okay, that feels like that Fanish sort of, we must explain this detail here, we must clarify. And we're looking for things to, like, fill in rather than necessarily flesh out. So Donna mentioned snapping fingers in the episode. Okay, let's refer back to the exact episode where, the Doctor started snapping his fingers because Donna was in that one. Yeah, again, like, nothing to really scream about here.
Morris seems to like personifying the TARDIS. We get this bit where it goes, as if in answer, the TARDIS began to make what Donna could only think of as a shuddering moan, perhaps the mechanical equivalent of someone sobbing with pain. Or no, it was more than that. It had a ghostly quality to it, as if there was a restless spirit somewhere deep within the machine, wailing out its desolation and sorrow from beyond the grave. Suppressing a shiver, she glanced at the Doctor.
Okay, that's fun. I think that's a good instinct for an episode like this, which is doing one of that whole edge of destruction thing where the TARDIS is trying to send a message or some way, or kind of do something like that. It's one of those episodes where the TARDIS is communicating in its own strange way. So yeah, doing a lot of kind of personified TARDIS kind of prose. It's kind of good instinct.
You know how the Starbase novel had Donna like thinking, oh, the Doctor did nothing wrong ever?
Yeah.
In Series 4. And how Wild Blue Yonder kind of didn't really key into much of the drama of Series 4. Because they were just very cuddly, 14 and Donna.
Yeah.
In the book, when the you spilt the coffee 14 outburst happens, it's written as, but then the Doctor's expression changed. The anger went out of his face. He stepped back. No, he said. And just like that, Donna's anger evaporated too. She understood the Doctor's sudden change of mood instantly and completely. They had known each other too long to be petty and vindictive.
I suppose that kind of, that almost relates to what we were saying about earlier, isn't it? Like, or maybe something we might have mentioned. Like the fact that, or something Tyler might have mentioned actually, the fact that there isn't, the lack of like a real, I guess, more biting kind of bust up between 14 and Donna is more just like a consequence of how like they've aged and stuff, and how they aren't like kind of, it's not like bickering old Donna anymore. So yeah.
Yeah. They'd known each other too long to be petty and vindictive, to apportion blame. Sometimes stuff happened and they just had to deal with it. It's high drama. When they're at the like top of the ship and they're, you know, looking out and the Doctor's explaining what happened, like we said on Russell's Instagram, he posted that script page where he had more continuity references originally. In the novel, we have some of that in the dialogue, but not all of it. So what the Doctor says is, we're so far out, past the continent reefs, over the realm of the Boltzmann brains, beyond matter and light and life. So that's from the script page that Russell posted that he deleted. But the stuff about standing... The stuff about the Doctor having been in this sort of situation before in Magnificent Time Ships is still not in the book. He still says, you know, he's never been out here before. He's never been this far out. He doesn't qualify it like he does in that deleted script page Russell posted, despite this dialogue having a little bit of that extra dialogue.
So what's the little bit of the extra dialogue that's in there? Sorry, I'm not clear. Like, what was included from the script? It's not the episode.
The Doctor saying we're past the continent reefs, over the realm of the Boltzmann brains.
Oh, that bit about the Boltzmann brains. I forgot that's not actually in the episode, is it? Yeah, fair enough.
So that's, yeah.
Yeah, maybe that sort of stuff plays better on prose than it would have on screen. Like putting like, oh, the Boltzmann brains and Tennant's mouth. It's like, it's just too distracting, I think.
The next chapter, Bright, doesn't really have anything interesting, although it's interesting the book holds back from giving the point of view of the doppelgangers for like ages. Like it doesn't use them much, like inside their heads.
I suppose you want to like hold back on that, I think, if you're doing like the POV of the doppelgangers. I mean, because they're supposed to be like unknowable, I think just going into their POV, I think if you did that too much or too early, it might kind of be pushing it.
In chapter Gilvane, one of the doppelganger interactions we get is, latching onto her words, the Doctor copy said, food is interesting because once I sort out the arms, he stopped, a look of concentration on his face, and slowly the arms began to reel in and the hands started to shrink, returning to normal. Then I have a problem with the jaw. Abruptly, horrifically, the Doctor copy's jaw dropped. Donna thought of all those different versions of A Christmas Carol she'd seen over the years. As a kid, she'd always dreaded the bit where the ghost of Jacob Marley unties the binding around his chin and his jaw drops open like a faulty portcullis. So that was kind of neat. Hey, Donna Christmas was in the comic too, so there's another link.
Yeah. Interesting, like, interpretation of something that's really just like a flashy CGI effect in the episode, and then trying to make it an intertextual sort of thing. Like, fair enough. I think you can see kind of how, like, the author of the novelization kind of responds, is kind of incorporating some of their own reactions to the episode and things that it reminded them of into the book. The
bit we were complimenting the director on a few minutes ago, that the director came up with so much of the ideas for the chase, obviously in the book that's going to be less good. In the book it's described as, the whoosh of air in Donna's ears didn't prevent her from hearing the echoing thuds behind them, though. She twisted in her seat to see the copies bearing down on them. To her horror, they had transformed again, this time into huge gorilla-like beasts, their massive hands on the ends of their overlong arms, thudding into the floor like jackhammers as they propelled themselves along. Doctor, Donna warned. He glanced over his shoulder. What the? The copies were still growing, their legs lengthening, shoulders bulking, heads elongating, features stretching. They all but filled the vast corridor now, two colossal, nightmarish creatures galumphing along in their pursuit of the hover buggy. Clumsy and heavy they may have been, but their sheer size meant they were gaining on their prey with each lumbering step. The Doctor and Donna faced front again, leaning forwards as if that would help. Skipping ahead a bit, he and Donna twisted in unison and saw that the Doctor copy, vast and monstrous, was now looming over them like a hideously misshapen inflatable. He had grabbed hold of the back of the buggy with his gigantic excavator scoop of a hand, but although he was managing to slow the buggy down, he still didn't have a strong enough grip to stop their progress completely. Skipping forward again, terrifying sight of the Doctor copy and the Donna copy surging towards them. The creatures had grown to such monstrous proportions that their combined bulk almost completely filled the vast wide corridor. They were squeezed together as they continued to advance, a remorselessly rolling avalanche of flesh and clothing in which huge flopping hands, limbs like immense pistons, and snarling contorted features could occasionally be seen. Skip, skip, skip. Two faces pressed together looked like the reflections of faces in a funhouse mirror. One of the Doctor copy's eyes, vast and bulging as if about to pop. The Donna copy's mouth, A zigzagging red line like a child's drawing of a staircase. Jumbled in between the faces were limbs and joints and fingers, all of them twitching and shifting. As Donna stepped from one side of the damaged buggy and the Doctor stepped from the other, the Doctor copy's massively swollen eye blinked once, then swiveled to regard them.
I will say, when you get like a prose description of something like the big tangle of flesh and eyes and mouths and stuff that is described there, I think you kind of tend to imagine something more fucked up than the actual special effect in the episode. So that's kind of one advantage that novelisation can kind of have. But on the other hand, that whole chase sequence with the buggy, it feels like the writing there wasn't actually very fast-paced writing, because it felt like there were a lot of kind of like multi-clause kind of sentences and kind of it just didn't feel like there was like it didn't feel like the pace of the actual chase was being conveyed very well.
Yeah.
It felt almost like a bit remote, like sort of like a stately, just sort of calmly commentating on something happening like far off.
Yeah. In chapter Stond, we get the big flux thing.
Yeah.
So I almost skipped to this bit first because I was so interested how the novel was going to handle it. So how it handles it is, "You're from Chiswick," said the Doctor in the empty room. "I know that." "Okay," said Donna and looked at him shrewdly. "So where are you from?" The Doctor frowned. "No, but we've done that. We talked about that. Back there out loud. All four of us know it's Gallifrey." Quietly, almost kindly, she said, "Except it's not." His frown deepened. "What do you mean?" "You don't know where you're from." Looking flustered, the Doctor said, "How do you know that? How does anyone know? How does Donna know?" "Back on Earth," she said, "when I was the Dr. Donna, I saw your mind. I've had 15 years without you and I saw everything that's happened to you since, and oh my God, it hurt." The Doctor's face creased. He backed up as if trying to distance himself, not just from her, but from the pain. His words were raw, bitter. "If you're doing this to break me down." "But we haven't stopped to talk," she said. "We haven't had a chance. It's always like that with you, running from one thing to the next. But I saw it. In your head. The flux. It destroyed half the universe," said the Doctor bitterly. "Because of me. We stand here now on the edge of creation, a creation which I devastated. So yes, I keep running, of course I do. How am I supposed to look back at that?" "It wasn't your fault," said Donna gently. His face twisted in anger. "I know." The air itself seemed momentarily shocked by the rawness of his despair. Then softly, cutting through the silence, Donna said, "I'm sorry." The Doctor's head dropped and he released a shuddering breath. When he met her eyes again, he looked haggard and so lonely. "Donna," he said, and it was almost a plea. "Is that you?" "Yeah," she said, "and you're not alone, because we shared a mind." "You can't fake that," he said, and a sad, weary smile broke across his face. "All those years, I missed you." He all but ran across the room towards her, arms stretched wide for a hug. Donna took 3 steps towards him, then her legs turned to gooey, colourless liquid beneath her. And that's actually the end of that chapter, too.
Interesting that they kind of changed the tone of the Doctor's reaction to Donna right at the end there.
Yeah.
Because we don't get him to kind of warmly smiling, be like, "Hey," in the actual episode. In the episode, Tennant really plays it as like he's so like fragile, like he could, crumple up like a bit of paper in the wind. It's a good call making that the end of a chapter as well, because it's kind of like kind of fucked up cliffhanger. But I would say the actual Flux reveal bit and Doctor's angst bit, it almost reminds me a little bit of like "I'm Finally Me" from the Star Beast last week. I mean, there are a couple of lines elaborating on the emotions of the thing, but it does feel like most of it is just kind of transcribing the dialogue.
Dialogue tags, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the next chapter picks up right where that stopped pretty much. Chapter Radico. "We stare at that universe so far away," the Donna copy said, "but you have owned it. You are such a prize. What are you?" The Doctor had no words. At that moment, he had nothing but disgust and hate inside him, much of it directed at himself. Unable to bear looking at the gleeful, dissolving Donna copy any longer, he turned and fled. Well, the bit I gushed about for ages, in prose form, that's...
Yeah.
The Doctor was running back through the service duct, running wildly, stumbling and ricocheting off the metal walls, his head spinning, raging. Everything that the Donna copy had said to him was crashing and exploding in his mind. All the destruction he'd caused, the lives he'd ruined, all the death and heartache that had happened because of him. And he thought she was Donna. He thought he'd been unburdening himself to someone who understood and cared, someone who'd shared his mind and knew how much guilt and grief and regret was stored up in there. He staggered to a halt. He had to let it out, all the rage, all the anguish. Turning, he punched the walls again and again, frenziedly, madly, letting it all go. And as he punched, he screamed, yelled, the sound echoing around him, a mad, furious ululation. He punched until his fists were numb, and he screamed until his throat was sore, and then he stopped, began to rebuild himself. He straightened up, pulled back his shoulders, clenched and unclenched his tingling, bruised fists. He swallowed, sniffed, and he summoned it from deep within himself. That iron resolve, that timeless, Strength. That determination to do the best he possibly could. That armor. Good, he said, and he moved on. So there's your good. Well, that's Mark Morris's interpretation of the good that you had an interesting take on.
Yeah, well, I think it's clearly kind of picking up the same thing I picked up there. Yeah, it's I think it kind of matters. Yeah, no, I think that was like a pretty good evocation of what was going on with the Doctor and that whole meltdown scene. Like, yeah, I thought it worked, because it would have been easy to fuck that up actually. Because I think if you weren't really paying attention to the script, you could just write a thing where like, oh, he was so sad about the flux and the timeless child that he just had to punch the wall. But the point is specifically that he feels like he fucked up in like kind of, he thought he was so close to actually. He felt like he was finally being able to open up to someone, and that was thrown back in his face. Like you said earlier in our discussion earlier. Yeah.
I'm finally me. Yeah. Meanwhile, Donna, of course, is doing the same mistake. The Doctor copy rolled his eyes playfully. Oh, I see. When something is gone, it keeps existing. He started to laugh. He laughed and laughed. He tilted his head back, guffawing at the ceiling. Donna watched in horror as the Doctor copy continued to tilt his head back. He tilted it back further than it was supposed to go. And then further still. His neck stretched to accommodate the movement, his back arched like a bow, his neck extending like the thick, tensile body of a snake, until his head was touching the floor. But even then he didn't stop. His head dipped back further, continuing the arc, so that his face came parallel with the floor, his nose almost brushing it. Then it stretched further still until his face rose up from the floor and he was staring at Donna from between his own feet. He grinned at her. The grin was far too wide. Auntie Iris, Mummy and Daddy, yap, 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 he scoffed. Why does he travel with someone as stupid as you? Then his body horribly contorted, his grinning face glaring at her from between his own knees. The Doctor copy scuttled towards her like a huge misshapen scorpion.
Okay, I will say, this might be controversial, I actually kind of prefer that prose version to the version we see in the episode. At least of the effect of the Doctor kind of bending over backwards and sticking his head between his legs and then scuttling after Donna. I think in the episode that feels very almost like throwaway. Like they know they can't do it well, so they just kind of fast forward through it a little bit and it's like, okay, quick, just get out of the way. Whereas there, I think the way that Morris kind of conveys the endless kind of tilting, like it keeps going, like past the point. It feels like horribly kind of drawn out and like protracted, kind of like fucked up. It was pretty good. Yeah, I like that.
It did feel very describing visuals to me. Like there's a difference between like a novel. You see this especially like in novels like before the advent of cinema and the rise of cinema wrote action in a very different way than I think most novelists tend to write action now, just because we kind of conceptualize visuals differently. This felt like a very, I'm describing what's happening in a visual scene to me, even though I have no idea the process of writing this novel. Morris might have written this without ever seeing the actual scene or the effects for that. I have absolutely no idea. But I don't think it was a bad description at all. It was just a very, very, load up your head because the visual imagery is coming inside kind of description. The book actually does add something in this chapter, like a thing that wasn't really in the episode, which is to do with why the Doctor has this face. So 14's talking to his doppelganger and he says, "Now I keep wondering why this face of mine came back, whether there's a reason, but let me say right now it was not to become you."
I'm questioning what the point of that line is, particularly. How would how would that even make sense? Why would him getting that face back even lead to becoming the...
Yeah, I don't get it.
Wait, hang on, is it the copy talking or the original Doctor talking?
It's the original talking to the copy.
Right. Why would it... Okay, that's strange. Yeah, that just feels like a bit of a non sequitur, if I'm honest.
The next chapter, Van Dien has a little Donna edition where when they're trying to slow their minds and heartbeats down, Donna is thinking, for a while, a few months during the time when Rose had been struggling with her true identity, Donna had tried yoga. It had been Sean who'd suggested it. It would relieve her tension, he had said, give her a calm place to go once a week. And it had for a while. Donna had especially liked the 15 minutes or so at the end of the session when the instructor had turned the lights down low and urged them to slip into a meditative state. It had been the only time in her week when she had felt completely serene. She tried to recreate that headspace now. So yoga, that's new.
Yeah, again, it does feel like a strange place in the story to suddenly put a diversion, if I'm honest, like, to kind of like the kind of Donna's lore. I suppose you might as well. Yeah.
The Captain Skull gender thing, in the book it's just, looking up again, she said, but why? Did they throw him out? Her out? Them out? Her, said the Doctor and frowned. I wonder. So there's nothing new there.
Yeah, nothing new there. Okay.
The next two chapters, Blintz and Sensil, are like super short and there's nothing different from the episode in them. Chapter 1, of course not the first chapter, it's near the end. It's the second last chapter. Chapter 1 has a few things. The Doctor felt like a man reunited with the love of his life after far too long a separation. He ran to the descending TARDIS and reached it just as it came to a halt, hovering a good 15 centimeters above the floor. The sonic screwdriver was still sticking out of the keyhole, so the Doctor grabbed it and pocketed it, though not without giving it a little kiss first.
I was just going to say, I don't remember him kissing it in the episode, but I might just be misremembering that.
He doesn't. That is a book-only thing, yeah.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah. When Evil Donna gets in the TARDIS, we're in her perspective, like her point of view now. It was incredible, beautiful. From here, she had access to all time and space, all knowledge, all forms. She could spread and grow throughout eternity. But what form should she take? What form would allow her to infiltrate a million worlds, spread her influence across the universe? She looked at the Doctor scuttling around the console, oblivious to her scrutiny. Such a puny creature to command such a magnificent vessel.
I'm curious, like, how does the book actually reveal that it's the evil Donna in the TARDIS? Because in the episode, it's kind of, there's a little bit of a moment, like, before it becomes obvious that that's happened, I guess.
When the Mrs. Bean exchange happens, we're from 14's perspective, and it's he turned to the Donna on his right. She shrugged, looked helpless. It just is, she spluttered. In a burst of movement, the Doctor lunged forward, grabbed the Donna on his right, blah, 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 drags her onto it.
Right, so no insight into his psychology there, or reasoning.
No. And then we get them in the TARDIS for a very quick paragraph. And then we get Donna, the real Donna, couldn't believe what had happened. She stood in the spaceship corridor, alarm still blaring around her, watching the TARDIS fade away before her eyes. Doctor, she screamed, terrified. So the Doctor, the real Donna, prose tells you.
Okay, so I guess the narration just like tells you straight out, this is the real Donna, yeah. Because I was wondering in the actual episode, when we see the real Donna kind of screaming after the TARDIS, like, no, Doctor, it's me. Like, I was wondering, like, are we meant to, like, believe her yet? And it's not, and it wasn't until, like, a bit later, oh, right, wow, it's actually not the fake screaming there, trying to be real. It is actually the real Donna. That's crazy. Yeah, so interesting they don't really bother with that, delaying that at all.
Yeah. The last chapter, Taxladia, has a couple of things, but now that process was complete. The ship was no longer an exploration vessel because there was nothing left to explore. It no longer provided living quarters for a busy and committed crew because the crew was long gone. 3 years ago, the captain of the great vessel had only one option left available to her, and that option was to prevent the entity which had infected and ultimately destroyed her crew from spreading its poison throughout the universe. So we're pulling back a bit there.
They mentioned that infected and destroyed the crew. There isn't really anything in the episode about how what actually happened there, what it did to them.
Yeah, so that feels new to me, that little revelation.
Yeah.
Doppelganger 14's death is kind of interesting. It's from his perspective. Well, its perspective, because it says it saw the robot press the button. It tried to scrabble to a halt, tried to change to realign, to become not solid, not meat, not matter, but what it had been before, something different, non-matter, energy without form. If only it could change back to what it had been, it would survive. It would be beyond the limiting laws of this universe. But it had a brain now, it had a meat brain, and it needed to use that brain to think, to concentrate. It needed time to do what it needed to do, but it had no time. Time had run out. It was trapped, and it dies.
Okay, interesting. So I guess that's sort of, yeah, because I suppose if you watch the episode, then you could have some interpretation of like, oh, well, they're not really dead. They just, been reverted back to formless, whatever the hell. But I guess this makes it clear that their transformation is kind of leads to them actually, they're proper dead, which I guess it just kind of puts a firm line under it, I suppose.
In the actual prose of the book, it says mavity, not gravity. Like it says the captain's body caught in its mavity field for so long, flared briefly like a match before vanishing forever.
Okay, that's good. I like that. That's a good detail.
When 14 and the Donna, when Donna and the Doctor survive, we get the Doctor stirred. Gently, he kissed the top of Donna's head. She knew it was his way of saying they'd done it. They'd survived.
There's still nothing about how the Doctor feels about having picked the wrong Donna and nearly got her killed. Or vice versa, for that matter.
Wilf's entrance is pretty much, it's, just like the episode. The old man jiggled up and down in his seat, waving his arms in the air from sheer joy. Donna almost expected him to leap up out of his wheelchair and dance a little jig despite his dodgy hips and knees. The dialogue's pretty much the same. The ending of the book is kind of interesting. So the very ending of the book is, as if oblivious to the devastation, the kitchen staff carried on fighting each other, and the tourist guide carried on fighting himself. Grabbing the handles of Wilf's wheelchair, the Doctor pushed him into the shadow of the TARDIS, Donna just behind them. All three cowered there, stunned and disbelieving as madness reigned around them. What's happening here? Hissed the Doctor. What?
Oh, okay. So no big explosion to kind of wrap it up.
We end on a what?
I suppose an explosion is kind of a different thing on screen than in prose. It might have been a bit, yeah. Even in the actual episode, like the cliffhanger feels kind of abruptly like just quick, just cut it here. Okay, we're not going to try and structure this too much. So yeah, I suppose. I mean, at the end of the day, it's this cliffhanger is like lurching into the events of the ensuing episode, which we don't really have access to or knowledge of. So I guess it's just going to feel a bit disjointed.
The explosion does happen, but the bit of the Doctor pushing Wilf behind the TARDIS and then saying what, that's like after in like the prose.
Maybe we'll see that at the start of the giggle. It'll be like a continuation.
Yeah, so that's this book, which was much slighter than the Star Beasts, and the Star Beasts wasn't like a huge one either, but the Star Beasts novel looks much better to me now, because that had a lot of interesting stuff with the extra texts. And I didn't love a lot of its insertions, but it was trying to shove more into the episode. But I think also Gary Russell had an easier time.
Yeah.
Because that's an episode with lots and lots of characters and lots of different settings and lots of different situations. Mark Morris had a very visual, two-handery episode to adapt here, which I think is more difficult.
Yeah.
To make an interesting book.
Yeah, a bit of a nightmare brief. Like the whole episode's so conceived around being on screen.
Yeah.
Like using these actors, using these visuals, using these visual effects and stuff. It's just like it's such a like sparse structure to try and make into prose. Yeah, it's a nightmare.
I wonder if even this was a bit requisite. Like maybe the giggle will make sense to be a book. And I think the Starbase did. And then if you're doing 2 or 3, it kind of feels odd to not do all 3.
And also, like, these are supposed to be anniversary specials, aren't they? Like, we kind of feel weird if you treated one as like less prominent than the other two.
You probably could have bound all these books together, given how small they are.
Yeah, the whole one big 60th anniversary package. It might have been clever, or maybe it might have made them less money.
Could have been fun if it was the same author. You might have been able to bleed them together a little bit or something too. But yeah, so that's that. The Giggle novel I am actually looking forward to because I like James Goss. James Goss is always interesting to me, and I think he's a good novelist, not just a good writer. So I'm fascinated how he'll take RTD's take the next David Tennant episode.
Yeah, and it seems like the Giggle will have a lot of stuff to for a novelisation author to dig into, certainly, because all the shit with the Toymaker and whatever happens with the regeneration, there's a lot of material there.
Yeah. And then the shooty novelizations will be coming before we even know it. We really have entered a whole new era of novel here, so that's exciting.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine we won't be getting like every single one done like we have here with the 60th. Maybe we might get 3 a season or something like that, or God knows.
Yeah, and that wraps up our discussion of Wild Blue Yonder, the Yonder extras, the Yonder novelization, the comic that came right before Yonder, all these Yondery things. So please let us know what you thought of this mini-series episode of the 60th, what you thought of this episode, any of the other stuff we talked about, any of the stuff we didn't talk about regarding Wild Blue Yonder or anything else we touched on. Please let us know what you thought. The comments for the Starbase discussion were actually really, really interesting. I really enjoyed reading through those. Lots of interesting different thoughts from everyone. So yeah, please comment away. Let us know what you thought. We'd love to read that. And onto the Giggle soon. Cheers for listening. Thanks.